Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Route 79 at night was never what you'd call welcoming, but I'd been running it long enough that the loneliness had stopped bothering me. 23 years behind the wheel teaches you to appreciate the quiet, the hum of the engine, the way the white lines pull you forward through the dark like a thread you're following home. You learn which rest stops have decent coffee, which way stations are sticklers about logs, and which stretches of highway go so long without a gas station that you'd better top off when you can. More than anything, you learn to trust the road, to read it like a language only drivers understand. But that night in early March, the road stopped making sense. I was hauling refrigerated goods out of Omaha, headed southeast toward Kansas City with a load of frozen poultry. Nothing glamorous, but steady work, and the pay was fair. The forecast had been calling for storms all week, one of those early spring systems that rolls in fast and mean, all wind and lightning with barely any rain to show for it. I'd driven through worse. Hell, I'd driven through blizzards in Montana where you couldn't see 10 feet past your hood, where the road disappeared under snow and you just had to trust your mirrors and pray the guy behind you was paying attention. A little thunder didn't scare me, but there's a difference between bad weather and something that feels wrong. And by the time I crossed into Missouri, the sky had that look. Heavy, bruised, like it was holding its breath. The CB radio had been crackling with chatter earlier in the evening, drivers trading warnings about high winds and downed branches near the state line. But as I got deeper into the route, the voices thinned out. One by one, they signed off or faded into static, until it was just me and the low hiss of dead air. I tried switching channels, scanning through the usual frequencies, but all I got was that empty buzz, the kind that makes you feel like you're the last person awake in the world. My phone still had a signal, 2 bars, enough to pull up the weather radar if I needed it, but I didn't bother. I'd been checking it all day and the story was always the same. Storms moving in, heavy wind, possible hail. Nothing I hadn't handled before. The first weird thing happened around 10:30. I was about 40 miles out from a rest area I'd marked on my map. A little pull-off with bathrooms and vending machines. Nothing fancy but clean enough and usually empty this time of night. I'd planned to grab a quick break there, stretch my legs, maybe heat up some soup on the dash cooker. The road was dark, real dark. The kind where your headlights feel like the only thing keeping the world from swallowing you whole. No streetlights out here, no houses, just farmland rolling away into nothing on both sides. And then, without warning, my headlights dimmed. Not out, just dimmed, like someone had turned down a switch. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. I frowned, tapped the gauge cluster, checked the alternator reading. Everything looked normal. Battery was fine. Voltage was holding steady. Maybe just a hiccup, a power fluctuation, something in the electrical system adjusting to the load. It happened sometimes, especially in older rigs, though mine wasn't that old. I made a mental note to have it checked when I got back to the yard, but I didn't think much of it beyond that. Then the radio cut out completely. Not static, not a fade, just silence. Dead air, like someone had pulled the plug. I reached over and twisted the dial, cycled through every channel, but there was nothing. Not even the usual background noise, the white hiss you get between stations. Just empty, hollow quiet. That bothered me more than the lights. The CB is a lifeline out here, especially on long hauls through empty country. It's how you hear about accidents ahead, road closures, cops running speed traps, weather turning bad. Without it, you're flying blind. I tried my phone next, thinking maybe I could pull up a traffic app or call dispatch. But when I glanced at the screen, the signal was gone. No bars, no service, just a blank icon where the network should have been. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the rig in neutral, and climbed out to take a look around. The wind hit me like a wall, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain even though the sky was still dry. I could see lightning in the distance, pale flickers on the horizon. Too far away to hear the thunder, but close enough to make the air feel electric. The highway stretched out in both directions, empty. Not a single pair of headlights in sight. That wasn't unusual for this stretch, especially late at night. But combined with everything else, the dead radio, the lost signal, the dimming lights, it felt heavier than it should have. I walked around the truck, checked the trailer connections, made sure the refrigeration unit was still running. Everything looked fine. The engine was purring, the coolant temp was steady, the tires were good. There was no reason for anything to be wrong, and yet everything felt off, like the air itself was holding something back. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors out of habit, and sat there for a minute, just listening. The wind rattled the mirrors, made the whole rig sway slightly on its suspension. I could hear the refrigeration unit humming behind me, a low mechanical drone that was somehow reassuring in its consistency. But beyond that, there was nothing. No distant traffic, no animal sounds, no rustle of leaves or creak of branches. Just wind and silence and the faint electric buzz of the storm moving closer. I put the truck back in gear and eased onto the highway, telling myself I was overthinking it, that I'd been on the road too long and my nerves were playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that I'd crossed some invisible line, and the world on the other side wasn't quite the same as the one I'd left behind. The rest area came up faster than I expected. A small blue sign reflecting in my headlights, and I took the exit without hesitation. I needed to regroup, check my phone again, maybe see if another driver had pulled in and could tell me if they were having the same issues. The ramp curved down and around, past a stand of trees that looked skeletal in the dark, branches twisting like fingers against the sky. The parking lot came into view, lit by a handful of tall sodium lights that cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. There were no other trucks, no cars, no RVs, just empty pavement and the low brick building that housed the restrooms, square and squat, and somehow lonelier than it should have been. I pulled into a spot near the building, facing the highway so I could see if anyone else came in, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute, like the world had been waiting for me to stop moving so it could close in around me. I sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, staring out at the empty lot and the dark trees beyond. The wind had picked up, strong enough now that I could feel the truck rocking slightly, and the sky above was almost black, clouds stacked so thick they'd swallowed every trace of starlight. I grabbed my phone, checked the screen. Still no signal. I tried turning it off and back on, the universal fix for everything. But when it powered up again, the result was the same. No service, no data, no connection to anything. I climbed out, zipped my jacket up against the wind and headed toward the building. The lights overhead flickered as I walked, just once, but long enough to make me glance up. The bulbs looked old, yellowed, humming with that electric whine you get from fixtures that had been running too long without maintenance. The restroom door was heavy, metal, and it groaned when I pulled it open. Inside, the fluorescent lights were buzzing, casting a harsh white glow over the tile floor and cinder block walls. It smelled like industrial cleaner and damp concrete, familiar and weirdly comforting in its ordinariness. I used the facilities, washed my hands, splashed some cold water on my face. The mirror showed what I expected: tired eyes, lines deeper than they used to be, stubble that needed a shave. Nothing unusual. Nothing wrong. But when I stepped back outside, the lights in the parking lot were off. Not flickering, not dimmed, just off. The whole lot was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of my truck's running lights and the distant, stuttering flashes of lightning on the horizon. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the tall poles where the sodium lamps had been burning just minutes before. They were dead, every single one, as if someone had thrown a breaker and killed the power all at once. My first thought was a blown transformer. Maybe the wind had knocked down a line somewhere. But that didn't explain why the building behind me still had power. I could see the fluorescent glow spilling out from the narrow windows near the roof, hear the faint hum of the lights inside. Just the parking lot was dark, and that didn't make sense. I walked back to the truck, moving faster now, every instinct telling me to get the hell out of there. The wind was louder, howling through the trees, and the first fat drops of rain were starting to fall, cold and heavy, smacking against my jacket and the pavement. I reached the driver's side door, yanked it open, and climbed inside, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking, just a little, and I hated that I couldn't explain why. There was no danger here, no visible threat, just a power outage and bad weather. But my gut was screaming at me, the same way it had screamed at me once before when I'd stopped at a truck stop in Arizona and walked in on a robbery in progress, the same way it had screamed when I'd seen a driver collapse from a heart attack at a way station in Nevada. That instinct, the one you can't explain and can't ignore, the one that keeps you alive when logic fails. I started the engine, felt the vibration settle into my bones, and reached for the CB radio out of habit. Still nothing. I tried my phone again, holding it up near the windshield like that might help. No signal. I sat there for a moment, staring out at the dark lot and the distant trees, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would be to wait out the storm, let the rain pass, get some sleep. But something about this place felt wrong now, felt like it was waiting for something, and I didn't want to be here when whatever it was decided to show up. I put the truck in gear, flipped on the headlights, and rolled forward toward the exit ramp, slow and steady, watching the mirrors for any sign of movement behind me. That's when I saw the door. The restroom door, the heavy metal one I'd walked through just minutes before. It was opening, slowly, like someone was pushing it from the inside, the edge pulling back to reveal a sliver of that harsh fluorescent light. But there was no one there. No hand on the handle. No figure stepping out. Just the door swinging open on its own, inch by inch, until it was halfway ajar and the light spilled out across the pavement like a pale tongue. I stopped the truck, staring, my foot frozen on the brake. The wind could have done it, I told myself. Could have caught the door if it wasn't latched right, pulled it open. But the wind was blowing the wrong direction, pushing against the building, not pulling away from it. And the door was heavy, too heavy to move on its own, especially against that kind of pressure. I didn't wait to see more. I punched the gas, felt the truck lurch forward, and took the exit ramp faster than I should have, tires squealing slightly on the wet pavement. The rain was coming down harder now, heavy sheets that blurred the windshield and made the wipers work double time. I hit the highway and merged back into the right lane, watching the rest area disappear behind me in the mirrors, the building shrinking into the dark until it was just another shadow among shadows. My heart was pounding, adrenaline singing in my veins, and I forced myself to breathe slow and steady, to focus on the road ahead. Whatever had just happened, it was behind me now. I was moving, and as long as I kept moving, I was okay. But the radio was still dead. The phone still had no signal. And somewhere up ahead, the storm was waiting, close enough now that I could see the lightning splitting the sky in jagged white lines, close enough that the thunder was starting to roll in, deep and low and vibrating through the frame of the truck. I checked the fuel gauge. 3/4 full, plenty to get me to Kansas City if I didn't stop again. I checked the mirrors. Empty road behind me, no headlights, no taillights, just rain and darkness. I checked the dashboard, the gauges, the readouts. Everything normal, everything fine. Except it wasn't fine. Because when I glanced at the CB radio one more time, hoping maybe it had flickered back to life, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The power light was on. The unit was active. The green LED glowing steady like it always did when it was receiving. But there was no sound, no voices, no static, just that light, burning bright in the dark cab, telling me the radio was working even though I couldn't hear a damn thing. I reached over, turned the volume knob up all the way. Nothing. I switched channels, cycled through every frequency, pressed the transmit button and said, "This is Dale Haskell. Anybody out there?" My voice sounded flat and strange in the enclosed space, swallowed by the hum of the engine and the hammer of rain on the roof. I released the button, waited for a response, anything, even static. But the radio stayed silent, that green light glowing like a tiny accusation, like it was mocking me for expecting it to work the way it should. I turned it off, reached over and clicked the power button, watched the light go dark. Then I sat back, gripped the wheel with both hands, and focused on driving. The storm was all around me now, lightning flashing so bright it turned the world white for half a second at a time, thunder cracking so loud I felt it in my chest. The rain was relentless, torrential, turning the highway into a river and making the truck hydroplane slightly every time I hit a deep puddle. I slowed down, dropped to 40, then 30, my headlights barely cutting through the downpour. I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead, couldn't see the lane markers, couldn't see anything but rain and darkness and the occasional flash of lightning that lit up the world in stark, colorless detail. And then, through the rain, I saw a figure, standing on the shoulder just outside the reach of my headlights, facing the road. I caught it for only a second, a silhouette in the flash of lightning, arms at its sides, perfectly still. Then the light was gone, and the figure was swallowed by darkness again. I eased off the gas, heart hammering, eyes locked on the spot where I'd seen it. Another flash, another brief window of light, and there it was again. Closer now, maybe 10 feet from the edge of the pavement. Tall, dark, unmoving. Waiting. I didn't stop, didn't slow down any more than I already had. I kept my foot steady on the pedal, kept the truck rolling forward, and told myself it was a tree, a post, a trick of the light in the rain. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew the shape of a person, the way a body stands, the way it holds itself against the wind. And whoever or whatever that was, it hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't turned its head, hadn't reacted to the truck at all. Just stood there, watching the road, like it had been waiting for something to come along, like it had been waiting for me. The figure disappeared behind me as I pushed forward through the rain, and I forced myself not to look back, not to check the mirrors one more time. Whatever I'd seen, it was gone now, swallowed by the storm and the distance, and dwelling on it wouldn't change anything. I had a schedule to keep, a load to deliver, and roads that wouldn't get any safer the longer I waited. The smart thing was to find another rest stop, somewhere with power and other drivers, somewhere that didn't feel like the last outpost before the edge of the world. But the highway stretched on with no exits in sight, just mile after mile of empty road bordered by fields I couldn't see and trees that bent and swayed in the wind like they were trying to pull free from the ground. I tried the CB radio again, even though I knew it wouldn't work. Flipped it on, watched the green light glow, cycled through the channels one by one. Nothing. Static would have been something, at least proof that the airwaves existed, that somewhere out there someone was transmitting. But this silence was different, heavier, like the radio was receiving perfectly, but there was simply nothing left to hear. I thought about Red Callister, my usual road partner on the longer hauls, the guy I'd call when the nights got too quiet or the route got too strange. Red had been driving even longer than I had, 27 years on the road, and he'd seen everything worth seeing and a few things that probably weren't. He was the one who taught me to trust my gut, to never ignore that cold feeling in your stomach when something didn't add up. "The road talks to you," he'd said once, sitting across from me at a truck stop in Iowa, coffee going cold between his hands. "You just gotta learn to listen." I wished I could call him now, hear his voice cut through the static and the silence, calm and steady like always. But my phone was still useless, the screen showing no signal no matter how many times I checked, and the CB was a dead end. I was on my own, and the realization settled over me like a weight I hadn't been carrying before but couldn't ignore now. The storm was hitting harder, wind buffeting the truck so violently I had to fight the wheel to keep it straight. Rain coming down in waves so thick the wipers couldn't keep up. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, just a wall of water lit by my headlights, and I slowed to a crawl, hazards on, praying nobody came up behind me too fast to stop. That's when the headlights appeared. 2 bright spots in my rearview mirror, cutting through the rain, coming up fast. Too fast. I tensed, foot hovering over the brake, watching as the lights closed the distance between us. For a moment, I thought they were going to hit me, just plow straight into the back of my trailer. But at the last second, they swerved into the left lane and roared past, so close, I felt the turbulence shake the cab. It was a pickup truck, dark-colored, maybe black or deep blue, hard to tell in the rain. The windows were tinted, the bed empty, and it was moving like the driver had somewhere urgent to be or didn't care about the conditions. I caught a glimpse of the license plate as it passed, tried to read the numbers, but the rain blurred everything and it was gone before I could focus. The truck didn't slow down. It just kept going, headlights receding into the storm ahead of me until they were swallowed completely, leaving me alone again on the highway. I exhaled, realized I'd been holding my breath, and loosened my grip on the wheel. Probably just someone trying to outrun the weather, I told myself. Someone who didn't know any better or didn't care. But something about the way it had come up on me, silent and sudden despite the storm, something about the speed and the darkness of it, left me uneasy. I checked the mirrors again, scanning for more lights, but there was nothing. Just rain and darkness, and the faint glow of my own taillights reflecting off the wet pavement. The next exit came up 10 minutes later. A small green sign half obscured by rain announcing a town I'd never heard of and services 2 miles ahead. I took it without thinking, desperate for any kind of refuge, any sign of civilization. The off-ramp curved down and away from the highway, winding through trees that pressed in close on both sides, branches scraping against the trailer as I navigated the tight turn. The road leveled out and I found myself on a 2-lane strip of cracked asphalt. No streetlights, no buildings, just darkness and the narrow tunnel of my headlights cutting through the rain. I almost turned back, almost headed straight for the on-ramp to get back to the highway. But then I saw it. A light, pale and flickering, barely visible through the downpour, but there. A sign of life. I followed the road toward the light, moving slowly, carefully, scanning for potholes and debris. The trees thinned out and gave way to a clearing, and I realized I was looking at a truck stop, or what used to be one. The building was old, single-story, flat-roofed, with a pair of gas pumps out front that looked like they hadn't worked in years. The sign above the door was unlit, the letters faded and peeling, but I could just make out the words, Traveler's Rest, Fuel, Food, Lodging. The light I'd seen was coming from a single bulb over the entrance, swaying in the wind, casting erratic shadows across the gravel parking lot. There were no other vehicles. No trucks, no cars, nothing. Just me and the rain and that one pale light. I pulled into the lot, parked close to the building, and sat there for a long moment. Engine idling. Wipers slapping back and forth across the windshield. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, that I should get back on the highway and keep driving until I found something that looked less abandoned, less wrong. But the storm wasn't letting up, and I was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline and too much coffee. I needed a break, needed to get out of the cab and stretch my legs, and maybe figure out why my phone and radio had stopped working. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, checked that it worked, and climbed out into the rain. The cold hit me immediately, soaking through my jacket in seconds, and I jogged toward the entrance, boots splashing through puddles. The door was unlocked, the handle turning easily under my hand, and I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit by a handful of fluorescent tubes that buzzed and flickered overhead, casting the space in a sickly yellow-green glow. It looked like a diner, or used to be one. A long counter ran along the back wall, stools bolted to the floor in front of it, and a few booths lined the windows. The floor was linoleum, cracked and peeling in places, and the air smelled like old grease and damp wood, and something else I couldn't quite place. Not decay exactly, but close, like something had been left to sit too long without moving. There was no one behind the counter, no one in the booths. No sound except the hum of the lights and the muffled roar of the storm outside. I called out, "Hello? Anybody here?" My voice echoed in the empty space, flat and small, and no one answered. I walked further in, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the room. The shelves behind the counter were mostly bare, just a few dusty cans and boxes that looked like they'd been there for decades. The cash register was old, the kind with mechanical buttons and a pull handle, and it was covered in a thin layer of grime. A door at the far end of the room stood ajar, leading into what I assumed was a back office or storage area. But I couldn't see anything beyond the threshold, just darkness. I turned back toward the entrance, ready to leave, when I heard it, a voice, faint, crackling, like it was coming from a great distance or through a bad connection. I froze, listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I saw it, a CB radio sitting on the counter near the register, the speaker grill facing out toward the room. The power light was on, green and steady, and the voice was coming from the speaker, low and distorted, but unmistakably human. I stepped closer, straining to make out the words. "Route 79, if you're receiving, respond." My heart skipped. Route 79. That was my route. I grabbed the handheld mic, pressed the transmit button, and said, "This is Dale Haskell. I'm receiving you. Who is this?" I released the button and waited, staring at the radio, willing it to respond. The voice came back, clearer now, though still edged with static. "Dale, it's Red. Jesus, I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Where the hell are you?" Relief flooded through me, so strong it almost made my knees weak. Red, of course it was Red. I should have known he'd be out here somewhere, working the same routes, keeping an eye out for drivers who might need help. I pressed the button again, spoke quickly. "I'm at some old truck stop off the highway, couple miles past the last exit. Place called Traveler's Rest. My phone's dead. CB's been silent all night. You getting this?" There was a pause, long enough that I thought I'd lost him, and then his voice came back, slower now, cautious. "Dale, listen to me. You need to get out of there, right now." I frowned, glanced around the empty diner. "Why? What's wrong?" "That place has been closed for 15 years, Red said, his voice tight, like he was trying to stay calm and failing. "There's no power there, no lights, nothing. If you're seeing lights, if you're hearing this, something's not right. Get back in your truck and get the hell out. Now. I looked up at the flickering fluorescent tubes overhead, at the glowing green light on the CB radio, at the pale bulb swinging outside the window. All of it powered. All of it working. Impossible as that should have been. My mouth went dry. I backed toward the door, eyes still on the radio, on the light, on the empty room that suddenly felt too small, too close. Red, I'm looking at the lights right now. They're on. The radio's working. I don't understand. I don't either, Red said. And I could hear the fear in his voice now, raw and unfiltered. But I've heard stories about that place. Drivers who stopped there and didn't come back out, or came out different, confused, like they'd lost time. Whatever you're seeing, it's not real, or it shouldn't be. Just get out, Dale, please. I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped the mic, turned, and ran for the door, slamming through it and out into the rain. The storm was even worse now, wind howling, rain lashing at me like needles, but I didn't care. I sprinted across the gravel lot to my truck, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and locking it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But I managed, and the engine roared to life, loud and reassuring and real. I shifted into gear, punched the gas, and tore out of that lot like the devil himself was on my heels. In the rearview mirror, I saw the light over the entrance flicker once, twice, and then go out. The whole building went dark, swallowed by the storm, and within seconds it was like it had never been there at all. Just darkness and rain and empty road. I kept driving, didn't slow down, didn't look back again. My heart was pounding, adrenaline singing through every nerve, and I couldn't stop thinking about what Red had said. Closed for 15 years, no power, drivers who didn't come back out. I'd been inside that place, walked through it, touched the counter, heard the radio. It had all felt real, solid, undeniable. But if Red was right, if that place had been dark and dead for over a decade, then what the hell had I just walked into? I found the on-ramp and merged back onto the highway, pushing the truck harder than I should have, needing the speed, needing the distance. The rain was still coming down, but it felt different now. Cleaner somehow, like I'd passed through something thick and toxic and come out the other side. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A sudden sharp sound that made me jump, and I grabbed it, stared at the screen. Signal. Full bars. Messages and missed calls flooding in, all from the last hour, all from dispatch and Red and a few other drivers I knew. I pulled over onto the shoulder, hands still shaking, and called Red back. He picked up on the first ring. "Dale? That you?" "Yeah," I said, my voice rough, throat tight. "Yeah, it's me. I'm out. I'm okay." "Thank God," he breathed, and I could hear the relief in his voice, heavy and genuine. "I thought I'd lost you, man. When your signal dropped and you didn't respond, I thought—" He trailed off, didn't finish the sentence, and I didn't need him to. I knew what he'd thought. Same thing I would have thought. "What the hell was that place?" I asked, staring out at the dark highway, at the rain still hammering down. "You said it's been closed for 15 years?" "At least," Red said. "Maybe longer. Used to be a decent stop back in the day. Then the highway got rerouted, traffic dried up, owner couldn't keep it running. Place has been sitting empty ever since. Some drivers say it's haunted, that you can still see the lights on stormy nights, but most folks just avoid it. I thought it was bullshit, ghost stories truckers tell each other to pass the time. But after tonight..." He paused, exhaled slowly. "I don't know what to think anymore." Neither did I. I sat there in the cab, listening to the rain drum against the roof, feeling the truck sway slightly in the wind. The logical part of my brain was screaming for an explanation, a rational reason for what I'd seen. Hallucination, maybe, brought on by exhaustion and stress, or a trick of the light, the storm playing games with my perception. But I knew what I'd experienced. I'd walked through that diner, heard that radio, seen those lights. It had been real as the wheel under my hands and the road beneath my tires. And if it wasn't, if Red was right, and that place had been dark and dead for years, then I didn't want to know what I'd actually been standing in. "You still there?" Red's voice pulled me back, grounding me in the present. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm here. Just trying to make sense of it." "Don't," he said, firm and final. "Some things you can't make sense of, Dale. Some things you just drive away from and don't look back. You're safe now. That's what matters." He was right, of course. He usually was. We talked for a few more minutes, him making sure I was really okay, me assuring him I was fine, just shaken. He told me to find a proper rest stop, get some sleep, and call him in the morning. I promised I would, thanked him for reaching out, for trying to warn me, and ended the call. Then I sat there for a while longer, staring out at the storm, trying to slow my heartbeat, trying to convince myself that everything was going to be okay. Eventually, I pulled back onto the highway and kept driving. The storm started to ease up about an hour later, the rain tapering off to a drizzle, the wind dying down to a steady push. I found a rest area with bright lights and a dozen other trucks parked in neat rows, and I pulled in gratefully, parking between a refrigerated rig and a flatbed hauling lumber. There were people here, other drivers moving around. The hum of idling engines and the faint smell of diesel. Normal, real, safe. I climbed into the sleeper berth, set an alarm for 6 hours, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flickering light over the entrance, heard Red's voice crackling through the radio, felt the cold dread that had settled in my gut the moment he told me the place should have been dark. Sleep came eventually, restless and shallow, and when I woke the sky was gray with dawn, and the storm had passed completely, leaving behind only wet pavement and a world that looked cleaner, sharper, like it had been washed free of something it had been carrying for too long. I checked my phone. Messages from dispatch, routine check-ins, nothing urgent. I responded, confirmed I was on schedule, and got ready to roll. Before I started the engine, I opened the CB radio app on my phone, scrolled through the logs, looking for any record of the transmission I'd heard the night before. But there was nothing. No record of Red's call, no timestamp, no frequency. Just a blank log, like it had never happened. I frowned, closed the app, and tried not to think about what that meant. The rest of the drive to Kansas City was uneventful. Clear roads, light traffic, no problems. I dropped the load on time, signed the paperwork, and headed back to the yard. Red called me that afternoon, just checking in, making sure I was really okay. We didn't talk about the truck stop, didn't revisit what had happened. There was an unspoken agreement between us that some things were better left alone, that dwelling on them wouldn't change anything and might make it worse. But I could hear it in his voice, the same unease I was feeling, the same nagging sense that we'd brushed up against something we weren't supposed to see. I didn't run Route 79 again for 6 months. When I finally did, it was midsummer, broad daylight, clear skies. I passed the exit where I'd turned off that night, and I didn't slow down, didn't even glance at the off-ramp. I just kept driving, eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. And I never looked for Traveler's Rest again, because some places, I've learned, are better left in the dark. Some places aren't meant to be found, and the drivers who find them anyway, well, they're the ones who end up with stories they can't quite explain, and memories that don't fade no matter how many miles they put between themselves and the road. But even now, years later. When I'm driving at night and the storms roll in, when the radio goes quiet and the phone loses signal, I feel it. That cold prickle at the back of my neck, that sense that I'm not as alone as I think I am. And I remember the light swaying over the entrance, the voice crackling through the speaker, the darkness that swallowed the building the moment I drove away. I remember, and I keep driving, because that's all you can do out here. Keep moving, keep your eyes forward, and trust that the road ahead is more real than the one you left behind. The weeks after that night passed slowly, measured out in miles and deliveries and the kind of routine that's supposed to make you feel safe. I kept my head down, ran my routes, checked in with dispatch like clockwork. But something had changed, some fundamental shift in the way I saw the road, the way I felt about being alone out there in the dark. I found myself checking my phone more often, making sure the signal held, making sure I wasn't drifting into some dead zone where the world could slip away without warning. I kept the CB radio on constantly now, even when it was just static, because the silence felt worse. At least static meant the radio was working, meant there were airwaves out there carrying voices and warnings, and proof that other people existed beyond the reach of my headlights. Red called me every few days just to check in, never mentioning Traveler's Rest directly, but always asking how I was holding up, if I'd seen anything strange, if the routes were treating me right. We'd talk about normal things, weather and traffic, and which truck stops had raised their fuel prices, but underneath it all was that shared understanding, that unspoken acknowledgement that we'd both touched something we weren't supposed to, and now we were waiting to see if it would reach back. He told me once, late at night, when we were both parked at different rest areas hundreds of miles apart, that he'd started avoiding certain stretches of highway, places where the exits felt wrong, or the mile markers seemed to repeat themselves. "I'm not superstitious," he said, his voice crackling slightly through the connection. "But I'm not stupid either. If the road's trying to tell you something, you listen." I took his advice, started planning my routes more carefully, avoiding the back roads and lonely stretches where services were sparse and help was hours away. It cost me time, sometimes added 50 or 60 miles to a run, but time was cheap compared to whatever I might encounter if I cut corners. Dispatch noticed, asked why I was burning extra fuel, why my logs showed detours that didn't make sense. I told them I was being cautious, that winter roads required more attention, and they didn't push it. They knew better than to question a driver with a clean record and 23 years of experience. But I could feel them watching, waiting to see if I'd slip, if whatever had rattled me would affect my performance. It was late April when I ran into Marla Fitch. I'd taken a load up through Nebraska, farm equipment headed to a distributor outside of Scottsbluff, and I was on my way back empty, deadheading south toward Denver to pick up the next job. The weather had turned warm, almost summer-like, and the roads were clear, traffic light, everything easy and straightforward. I'd stopped at a rest area just past the state line to grab some coffee and use the facilities, and that's where I saw her, standing next to an older Freightliner with faded paint and mismatched hubcaps, staring at the open hood like it had personally offended her. She was in her 50s maybe, short and stocky with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and coveralls that had seen better days. There was a toolbox open on the ground next to her, wrenches scattered around like she'd been working at this for a while, and the look on her face was pure frustration mixed with exhaustion. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself more than once, usually at 3 in the morning when something broke down in the middle of nowhere and the nearest mechanic was 100 miles away. I hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but something about the way she was just standing there, hands on her hips, staring at the engine like willpower alone might fix it, made me walk over. "You need a hand?" I called out, keeping my distance, giving her space to tell me to mind my own business if she wanted. She looked up, sized me up in about 2 seconds and nodded. "Alternators shot, I think. Or the belt, can't tell which. Either way, I'm not going anywhere until I figure it out, and I've got a delivery window closing in 6 hours. Her voice was rough, like she'd spent too many years breathing diesel fumes and cigarette smoke. But there was a sharpness to it, an intelligence that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing and just needed a second set of eyes. I walked over, peered into the engine bay. It was clean, well maintained, the kind of rig someone takes care of because it's not just a vehicle, it's a livelihood. I could see the belt right away, frayed and loose, barely holding tension. "Belt's gone," I said, pointing. "Alternator's probably fine, but you're not getting power to it. You got a spare?" She shook her head, frustrated. "Used my spare 2 months ago in Wyoming. Been meaning to pick up another one, kept putting it off. Stupid." She kicked at the gravel, hands shoved in her pockets. "Guess I'm calling a tow, sitting here until someone shows up with the part." I glanced at my watch, did the math. I had time, not a lot, but enough. "I've got a spare that might fit. Won't know until we try, but if it works, you can pay me back whenever. No point sitting here waiting for a tow if we can fix it now." She stared at me for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if I was genuine or if there was some angle she wasn't seeing. Then she nodded, just once, and said, "All right, let's try it." We spent the next 40 minutes swapping out the belt, working in comfortable silence broken only by the occasional request for a tool or a comment about the weather. She knew her way around an engine, didn't need me to explain anything, just worked methodically and efficiently, the way you do when you've been doing this long enough that your hands remember what your brain forgets. When we finally got the new belt on and tensioned properly, she climbed into the cab, turned the key, and the engine roared to life, smooth and steady. She let it run for a minute, checking the gauges, then killed it and climbed back out, wiping her hands on a rag. "I owe you," she said, extending a hand. "Marla Fitch?" "Dale Haskell," I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, calloused, the handshake of someone who'd worked hard their whole life and wasn't afraid to show it. "You don't owe me anything. Just pay it forward next time you see someone stuck." She smiled, small and brief, but genuine. "Fair enough. You running solo?" "Most of the time," I said. "Easier that way. Don't have to worry about anyone else's schedule." "I hear that," she said, leaning against the truck, arms crossed. "Been solo for 8 years now. Used to run with a partner, but that fell apart. Now it's just me and the road." She paused, glanced out at the highway, at the steady stream of traffic moving past. "Gets lonely sometimes, but it's honest work, you know where you stand." We talked for a while longer, trading stories the way drivers do, comparing routes and schedules and the quirks of different truck stops along the way. She told me she usually worked the northern routes, Montana and Wyoming and the Dakotas, running agricultural supplies and equipment to farms and co-ops. Hard work, long hours, but steady. I told her I'd been running all over, wherever dispatch sent me, mostly refrigerated goods and time-sensitive cargo. She nodded along, listening, and then she asked the question I'd been hoping to avoid. "You ever run Route 79 through Missouri?" I froze just for a second, but long enough that she noticed. "Yeah," I said carefully. "I've run it. Why?" She looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly, like she was trying to read something in my face. "Had a weird run through there last month. Storm came in out of nowhere, lost all my electronics, phone, radio, everything. Found myself at this old rest area, place called Evergreen Station. Lights were on, building looked open, but when I went inside, it was empty. I mean, completely empty. No furniture, no fixtures, just concrete floors and bare walls. But the lights were on, bright as day, and I could hear voices coming from somewhere, like a radio playing in another room. Couldn't find the source, couldn't figure out where the power was coming from. Spooked me bad enough I got back in the truck and left. Didn't stop again until I was 2 states over. My mouth went dry. Different place, same pattern. Electronics cutting out. Lights that shouldn't be on. Voices with no source. I wanted to tell her about Traveler's Rest, about what Red had told me, about the empty CB logs and the building that vanished into darkness. But I also didn't want to sound crazy. Didn't want to turn this into some kind of ghost story swap that would make both of us paranoid about every strange thing we saw on the road. So I just nodded, kept my voice neutral. Yeah, that stretch can get weird. Storms mess with the signals. Sometimes you lose everything all at once. Happened to me once too. Best thing you can do is keep moving. Don't stop unless you absolutely have to. She studied me for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. That's what I figured. Still can't explain the lights, though. Place should have been condemned years ago. No reason for it to have power. She pushed off from the truck, straightened up. Anyway, I should get moving. Got miles to cover and daylight's burning. Thanks again for the help, Dale. Maybe I'll see you out there sometime. Maybe, I said, shaking her hand again. Stay safe. You too, she said. And there was weight behind those words, like she knew more than she was saying, like she'd seen enough to understand that safe was a relative term out here. She climbed into her cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the rest area, her truck merging smoothly into traffic and disappearing down the highway. I stood there for a while, watching her go, thinking about Evergreen Station and Traveler's Rest and all the other places that probably existed along these roads. Places that shouldn't be open, shouldn't have power, shouldn't be waiting for drivers like us to stumble into them. I got back in my own truck, checked my phone out of habit. Full signal, messages from dispatch, everything normal. I pulled up a map, searched for Evergreen Station. Nothing came up. I tried different spellings, different search terms, but the results were always the same. No rest area, no truck stop, no station by that name anywhere near Route 79. I tried searching for Traveler's Rest too, just to see if maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, if exhaustion and stress had warped my memory into something that never happened. But that search came up empty as well. No records, no reviews, no mentions on any of the trucker forums I checked. It was like both places had been erased, scrubbed from the maps and databases existing only in the memories of drivers who'd been unlucky enough to find them. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone screen, feeling that cold dread settle in my gut again. If Marla had experienced the same thing I had, if other drivers were out there encountering these places, these blackout zones where reality bent and the rules stopped applying, then it wasn't isolated. It was a pattern, and patterns meant something. They meant there was a system at work, something deliberate, something that knew how to find drivers when they were alone and vulnerable and cut off from help. I didn't know what it was, didn't have a name for it, didn't even know if it was something physical or just some trick of the environment, some confluence of weather and electromagnetic interference that created pockets where things went wrong. But I knew it was real, knew it was dangerous, and knew that ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. I called Red that night from a hotel room in Colorado Springs, needing to hear a friendly voice, needing to talk through what Marla had told me. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. You think it's connected? Traveler's Rest and this Evergreen Station? I don't know, I admitted. But it's too similar to be coincidence. Same setup, same blackout conditions, same feeling of wrongness. And neither place exists on any map I can find. That bothers me more than anything else. Yeah, Red said, his voice thoughtful. Yeah, that bothers me too. Listen, I've been asking around, talking to some of the old-timers who've been on these roads longer than either of us. Got a few stories that sound familiar. Places that appear during storms or at night. Places that look operational but aren't. Places where drivers stop and lose time or come out feeling like something's off. Nobody talks about it much because it sounds crazy, because there's no proof, but the stories are out there if you know how to ask. "What do you think it is?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He sighed, and I could hear him shifting, probably sitting up in his own sleeper berth somewhere, staring out at his own stretch of dark highway. "Honestly, I think there are places on these roads that don't follow the normal rules. Places that exist in the cracks, that show up when conditions are right and vanish when they're not. Maybe it's electromagnetic, maybe it's something about the way the roads were built, crossing old territories or burial grounds or fault lines. Maybe it's just the road itself, the asphalt and the miles and all the people who've driven them, leaving behind some kind of residue that builds up over time. I don't know. But I know better than to dismiss it because I felt it too. That sense that you're not where you think you are. That the world has shifted just slightly out of phase and you're driving through the shadow of something that shouldn't exist. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to argue, wanted to find some rational explanation that would make it all make sense, but I couldn't. Because he was right. I had felt it, that sense of being out of phase, of driving through something that was real but shouldn't be, and now that I knew other drivers had experienced it too, now that I had names and stories to attach to that feeling, it was harder to pretend it was just exhaustion or imagination. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "Just avoid those routes? Hope we don't stumble into one of these places?" "That's all we can do," Red said. "Stay alert, trust your instincts, and if something feels wrong, don't stop. Don't investigate. Just keep moving. These places, whatever they are, they can't touch you if you don't engage with them. At least, that's the theory. Nobody really knows for sure because the drivers who stop and go inside, well, most of them don't talk about it afterwards. And the ones who do, they're never quite the same." I thought about that, about the implications of what he was saying. Drivers changed by these encounters, marked by them in ways that weren't visible but were undeniable. I wondered if I was one of them now, if walking into Traveler's Rest had left some kind of residue on me, some shadow that would follow me for the rest of my time on the road. I didn't feel different, but then again, how would I know? How would anyone know if the change was subtle enough, gradual enough that it just became part of who you were? We talked for a while longer, trading theories and warnings, promising to stay in touch more regularly. When I finally hung up and lay back on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt both better and worse. Better because I wasn't alone in this, because there were other people who understood what I'd experienced and took it seriously. Worse because now I knew it wasn't isolated, wasn't some one-time glitch in the fabric of the world. It was ongoing, persistent, waiting out there on the roads for the next driver to wander into its reach. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept waking up to check my phone, make sure the signal was holding, make sure I was still connected to the world in some tangible way. And when I finally did drift off, I dreamed about highways that stretched on forever, mile markers that counted backward, and rest areas full of lights and voices that disappeared the moment I opened my eyes. In the morning, I checked out early, grabbed coffee from a gas station and hit the road while the sun was still low on the horizon. The day was clear and bright, traffic steady, everything normal and mundane and exactly what I needed. I focused on the road ahead, on the simple mechanics of driving, on the rhythm of the engine and the feel of the wheel under my hands. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere behind me or ahead of me or just beyond the edge of my vision, something was waiting. And the worst part was knowing that no matter how carefully I planned my routes, no matter how alert I stayed or how many precautions I took, there would come a night when the storms rolled in and the signals dropped, and I'd find myself at another exit, another rest area, another place that shouldn't exist but did. And when that happened, I'd have to make the same choice I'd made at Traveler's Rest. Stop and investigate, or keep driving, and never know what I'd narrowly avoided. I chose to keep driving. Always keep driving. Because Red was right about one thing. The road talks to you if you know how to listen. And what it was telling me now, clear as day, was that some exits aren't meant to be taken. Some lights aren't meant to guide you home, and some places will welcome you in and never let you leave the same person you were when you arrived. I'd been lucky once, maybe twice if you counted the fact that I'd listened to Red's warning and gotten out before something worse happened. But luck runs out eventually, and when it does, all you have left is instinct and experience and the hope that you've learned enough to recognize danger before it's too late. So I drove, put miles between me and that hotel room, between me and the memories of flickering lights and impossible voices. I ran my routes, delivered my loads, checked in with dispatch and Red and the handful of other drivers I trusted enough to talk to about the things we'd seen. And every time I passed an exit in the dark, every time I saw a rest area that looked just a little too isolated, or a truck stop that seemed just a little too quiet, I kept my foot on the gas and my eyes on the road ahead. Because whatever was out there, whatever these blackout zones were and why they existed, I didn't need to understand them. I just needed to survive them. And survival, I'd learned, was less about courage and more about knowing when to walk away, when to trust that cold feeling in your gut, and when to let the mystery remain a mystery, because some answers come with a price you're not willing to pay. 3 months passed before Route 79 came up again on my schedule. I'd been avoiding it, taking longer routes that added hours to my runs, finding reasons to turn down loads that would send me through Missouri. Dispatch noticed, but didn't say anything. Probably figured I had my reasons, and as long as I kept making deliveries on time, they'd let me work around it. But eventually, the numbers caught up with me, and I got assigned a time-sensitive load that couldn't be rerouted. Frozen pharmaceuticals that needed to reach a distribution center in Kansas City within 18 hours. The only way to make the window was straight through on Route 79. No detours, no delays. I took the job because I had to, because turning it down would raise questions I didn't want to answer. But I planned it carefully. Made sure I'd hit that stretch during daylight hours, made sure my phone was charged and my CB was working, and I had Red's number on speed dial. I told myself it would be fine, that whatever happened to me before was a fluke, a perfect storm of bad weather and bad timing and exhaustion that wouldn't repeat itself. But I didn't believe it. Not really. I could feel the dread building in my gut as I loaded up and pulled out of the yard, could feel it settling heavier with every mile that brought me closer to that stretch of highway. The weather was clear when I started, mid-morning sun burning off the last of the dew, sky so blue it hurt to look at. Perfect driving conditions, the kind that should have made me relax, should have let me settle into the rhythm of the road and forget about everything else. But I couldn't shake the tension in my shoulders, the way my hands gripped the wheel just a little too tight, the way I kept checking the mirrors even though there was nothing behind me but empty highway. The CB was quiet, just the occasional burst of chatter from other drivers trading information about traffic or road conditions, and my phone showed full signal, 5 bars, everything working exactly the way it should. I crossed into Missouri just after noon, and Route 79 opened up ahead of me like a long gray ribbon cutting through farmland and forest. The road was familiar now in a way that made my skin crawl. Every curve and exit burned into my memory from that night 3 months ago. I passed the rest area where I'd first noticed the lights dimming, and I didn't slow down, didn't even glance at the exit. Just kept my foot steady on the gas and my eyes locked forward. The mile markers ticked past, steady and predictable, counting down the distance to Kansas City. 40 miles, 35, 30. Each one felt like a small victory, proof that I was making it through, that nothing was going to happen this time. But then the sky started to change. It was subtle at first, just a thickening of the clouds on the western horizon, a darkening that could have been nothing more than afternoon shadows. But within 20 minutes the whole sky had turned gray, heavy clouds rolling in faster than any weather system should move, and the temperature dropped so suddenly I could feel it through the cab's climate control. I checked the weather app on my phone, but it showed clear skies. No warnings. No indication that a storm was anywhere near me. I looked out the windshield at the darkness gathering overhead and felt my stomach drop. This wasn't natural. This was the same pattern as before, the same impossible speed, the same sense that the weather was being directed rather than simply happening. The first drops of rain hit the windshield like stones, hard and heavy, and within seconds it was a downpour. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, the world disappearing behind a wall of water, and I had to slow down, had to ease off the gas before I hydroplaned or worse. My headlights cut through the rain in weak yellow cones that barely reached 10 feet, and the wipers were working overtime, slapping back and forth in a rhythm that sounded frantic, desperate. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd call Red, let him know what was happening, but when I looked at the screen it showed no signal. 0 bars, just like before. The CB was still on, but when I tried to transmit, all I got was dead air, that same hollow silence that told me the radio was working but there was nothing out there to receive it. I should have pulled over, should have found a safe place to wait out the storm. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving, to not stop, to put as much distance between me and whatever was happening as I possibly could. So I drove, crawling forward at 30 miles an hour with my hazards on, praying that nobody came up behind me too fast, praying that I'd make it through this stretch before something worse happened. The rain hammered down, relentless and angry, and the thunder rolled in so close I could feel it vibrating through the frame of the truck. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines, illuminating the world in brief, colorless flashes that showed me nothing but rain, an empty road, and darkness pressing in from all sides. That's when I saw the exit sign. It appeared suddenly in my headlights, a green rectangle reflecting the light, white letters spelling out words I didn't recognize. Meridian Rest, 1 mile. I'd never seen that exit before, never heard of Meridian Rest, and I'd driven this route enough times to know every exit by heart. But there it was, solid and real and impossible. And as I passed it, I felt a pull, a physical sensation like something was tugging at the truck, trying to guide me toward that off-ramp. I gripped the wheel harder, fought against the pull, and kept going straight. But then the sign appeared again, closer now. Meridian Rest, 1 mile. Same sign, same distance, like I hadn't moved at all. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding my system. I checked the odometer, watched the numbers ticking up, proof that I was moving forward. But when I looked up, the sign was there again. Exactly the same. Exactly 1 mile ahead. Meridian Rest, 1 mile. I pushed the gas pedal down, accelerated as much as I dared given the conditions, and the truck surged forward. The mile marker on the side of the road blurred past, then another, but the sign stayed ahead of me, always 1 mile away, always promising a rest stop that I knew with absolute certainty I should not take. Then the radio crackled to life, not voices, not static, just a low hum that rose and fell like breathing. I reached over and turned it off, clicked the power button and watched the light go dark. But the sound continued, emanating from the speaker even though the unit was dead. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and underneath it I could hear something else. A whisper, faint and distorted, but unmistakably words. I couldn't make them out, couldn't separate them from the background noise, but I knew they were there, knew they were being spoken deliberately, trying to tell me something or call me towards something. I grabbed my phone, tried to turn it on, even though I knew it wouldn't work. The screen lit up, but instead of the normal display, all I saw was static, black and white pixels dancing across the glass like television snow. I pressed the power button, held it down, trying to force a restart, but the static remained, unchanging, hypnotic. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on driving, on keeping the truck between the lines, on ignoring the pull that was getting stronger with every mile. The exit appeared in my headlights without warning, the off-ramp curving away to the right, and for a split second I felt the wheel turn in my hands, felt the truck start to drift toward it. I yanked hard to the left, overcorrecting, and the trailer fishtailed slightly before I got it back under control. My hands were shaking, breath coming fast and shallow, and I could taste copper in my mouth where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. The exit slid past, receding in my mirrors, and I thought I'd made it. Thought I'd resisted whatever force was trying to guide me off the highway. But then I saw the lights. Not headlights, not lightning, just lights floating in the darkness to my right, pale and steady, moving parallel to the highway. There were dozens of them, maybe more, arranged in rows like windows in a building. But there was no building, no structure. Just the lights hanging in empty space. They kept pace with me as I drove, matching my speed exactly, and I could see shadows moving behind them, shapes that might have been people but were too far away to make out clearly. I didn't look directly at them, kept my eyes on the road ahead, but I could see them in my peripheral vision, could feel their presence like weight pressing against the side of the truck. The whispers from the radio grew louder, clearer, and now I could make out fragments of words. Stop. Rest. Safe here. Stop. The voice was familiar somehow, though I couldn't place it, couldn't attach it to any memory or person I knew. It sounded kind, inviting, like someone offering help rather than demanding it. But underneath that kindness was something else, something hungry and patient and utterly inhuman. I reached over and ripped the CB radio out of its mount, yanked the power cable free, and threw the whole unit into the back of the cab. The whispers stopped immediately, leaving only the sound of rain and wind and my own ragged breathing. The lights began to fade, growing dimmer and farther away, until they were just pale smudges in the darkness before disappearing entirely. The pull lessened, the sensation of being guided toward something releasing its grip on me, and suddenly I was just driving through a rainstorm, nothing more. The exit signs returned to normal, showing familiar names and accurate distances. The mile markers made sense again, counting up the way they should. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat, and when I picked it up, the screen showed normal icons, normal time, full signal restored. Messages from dispatch asking for an ETA, texts from Red checking in, everything mundane and ordinary and real. I pulled over at the next rest area I found, a legitimate one with bright lights and security cameras and a dozen other trucks parked in neat rows. My hands were still shaking so badly I could barely turn the key to shut off the engine, and when I climbed out of the cab, my legs felt weak, unsteady, like I'd been driving for days instead of hours. I walked around the truck, checked the trailer, made sure everything was secure and undamaged. The refrigeration unit was running perfectly, the load inside still frozen solid, completely unaffected by whatever I'd just driven through. On the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, I felt different. Felt like something had been scraped away or hollowed out, leaving a space that echoed with memories I couldn't quite grasp. I called Red from inside the rest area building, standing under the fluorescent lights with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking, just holding it for the warmth. He answered on the second ring, and before he could say anything, I started talking, told him everything that had happened. The repeating exit signs, the floating lights, the whispers from a radio that shouldn't have been working. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence before he spoke. "You made it through," he said, finally, his voice quiet but firm. "That's what matters. You didn't stop, didn't take the exit, didn't let it pull you off the road. A lot of drivers can't say that." "What the hell was it, Red?" I asked, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. The need for an answer that made sense. What's happening on that route? "I don't know," he said, and I believed him. "But I think it's been there a long time, maybe as long as the road itself. And I think it's getting stronger, or maybe just more active. More drivers are reporting things, seeing things, especially at night or during storms. The pattern's always the same. Electronics fail, impossible exits appear, and if you stop, if you take one of those exits, you end up somewhere that exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Some drivers find their way back, others don't. And the ones who do, they're never quite sure how much time passed or what happened while they were gone." I thought about the lights I'd seen, the shadows moving behind them. "You think those are other drivers? The ones who stopped?" "Maybe," Red said. "Or maybe there's something else. Something that uses the appearance of people to make you think it's safe." "I don't know, Dale. Nobody knows. We just know enough to be afraid of it, to avoid it when we can, and survive it when we can't." We talked for a while longer, and by the time I hung up, I felt steadier, more grounded. I went back to the truck, climbed into the sleeper berth, and tried to rest for a few hours before finishing the drive to Kansas City. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by dreams of highways that looped back on themselves and exit signs that counted down to 0. When I woke up, it was late afternoon. The storm had passed completely, and the sun was breaking through the clouds in long golden shafts that made the wet pavement shimmer like glass. I delivered the load on time, signed the paperwork, and headed back to the yard. Dispatch called to congratulate me on making the tight window, asked if I was available for another run the next day. I told them I needed a few days off, personal time, nothing urgent but necessary. They approved it without question. Probably heard something in my voice that told them not to push. I spent those days at home, away from the truck and the road, trying to process what had happened, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the worst of it, that stress and exhaustion had amplified normal events into something more sinister. But I couldn't shake it, couldn't forget the way the exit sign had repeated itself, the way the lights had followed me, the way the whispers had sounded so reasonable, so kind, even as they tried to lure me off the road. And I couldn't forget what Red had said about drivers who stopped and didn't come back, or came back different. I wondered how many trucks were out there right now, parked at rest areas that didn't exist on any map. Drivers sitting in cabs that were slowly filling with that patient, hungry presence I'd felt pressing against my truck. I wondered if they knew they were trapped, if they were trying to get out, or if whatever had taken them had convinced them they were exactly where they wanted to be. When I went back to work, I requested different routes, anything that didn't involve Route 79. Dispatch accommodated me for a while, but eventually the question came up, the one I'd been dreading. Why was I avoiding that route? Was there a problem with the road conditions? Something I knew that they didn't? I told them it was personal preference, that I'd had some close calls there and wanted to try different corridors for a while. They accepted the explanation, but I could tell they weren't entirely satisfied. Could tell they thought I was being superstitious or irrational. And maybe I was. Maybe everything I'd experienced had a logical explanation I just couldn't see. Some combination of weather and electromagnetic interference and psychological stress that created the illusion of something impossible. But I didn't think so. I thought about Marla Fitch and her encounter at Evergreen Station, about Red's warnings and the stories from other drivers he'd collected, about the pattern that was too consistent to be coincidence. I thought about the fact that these places didn't appear on maps, didn't leave records, didn't exist in any official capacity, and yet were as real as the road I drove on every day. And I realized that some questions don't have answers, at least not answers that humans are equipped to understand. Some things just are, existing in the spaces between what we know and what we can prove, and the only smart response is to acknowledge them and stay clear. I still drive long haul, still run routes all over the country, still spend more nights in my cab than in my own bed. But I'm more careful now, more aware of the signs that something's wrong. When the weather turns too fast, when the electronics start failing, when exit signs appear that I don't recognize, I don't investigate. I keep my foot on the gas and my eyes forward, and I trust that whatever's out there, it can't touch me as long as I keep moving. Red and I check in with each other regularly now, trading information about routes and conditions and the occasional strange encounter that doesn't quite add up. Marla called me once, a few weeks after our first meeting, to tell me she'd quit running the northern routes entirely, moved to coastal corridors where the roads were newer and the history less complicated. I didn't blame her. Sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a rest area and the world outside is dark and quiet, I think about those lights I saw floating in the storm, those shadows that might have been people. I think about the whispers from the radio, the voice that sounded kind and patient and wrong. And I think about all the drivers who've gone missing over the years, the ones whose trucks were found abandoned on the shoulder with the engine still running and the door hanging open, the ones who just disappeared without explanation or trace. I wonder how many of them stopped at places like Traveler's Rest, or Evergreen Station, or Meridian Rest, places that offered shelter and safety and something else, something that looked like refuge, but was really a trap. I wonder if they're still out there, driving roads that don't connect to anything, delivering loads that never arrive, trapped in a loop that feels like progress but goes nowhere. And I wonder if someday, despite all my precautions and all my awareness, I'll find myself on one of those roads, taking one of those exits, walking into one of those buildings that shouldn't exist but does. I wonder if I'll recognize it when it happens, if I'll have time to turn back, or if it'll feel so natural, so inevitable, that I won't even realize I've crossed over until it's too late. But until then, I drive. I keep my schedule, make my deliveries, maintain my equipment, and trust that the line between the world I know and the world I glimpsed that night on Route 79 is something I can navigate as long as I stay alert. The road is still my home, still the place where I feel most myself, most free. But it's also become something else, a territory marked with invisible boundaries and hidden dangers, places where the rules change without warning, and survival depends on recognizing the signs before they become inescapable. Route 79 is still there, still carrying traffic, still connecting cities and towns and lives across Missouri. And somewhere along that route, probably during storms or at night when visibility is low and help is far away, those exits still appear. Those lights still float in the darkness. Those voices still whisper from radios that shouldn't be working. And drivers still see them, still feel the pull, still face the choice between stopping and continuing. Some choose to stop. Some don't. And for those who keep driving, who resist the pull and make it through to the other side, the memory stays with them. a reminder that the world is bigger and stranger and more dangerous than it appears on any map. I made it through. I'm still here, still driving, still alive. But I'm not unchanged. Something about that experience marked me, left an impression that goes deeper than fear or trauma, something that feels like recognition. Like I brushed up against something ancient and patient and vast, something that's been waiting alongside these roads since they were first paved, watching drivers pass and occasionally reaching out to see who'll stop, who'll listen, who'll step off the path and into the spaces between. I didn't stop, but I came close. And that closeness, that near miss, is something I carry with me on every run, every mile, every time I see storm clouds gathering on the horizon and feel my phone signal start to fade. The road talks to you, if you know how to listen. But sometimes what it says isn't a warning or a guide. Sometimes it's an invitation. And the hardest part of being a driver, of living this life out here on the endless highway, is learning to recognize the difference between the two, and having the strength to keep moving when every instinct tells you to stop and see what's waiting just beyond the next exit. Just past the lights that shouldn't be there, just inside the door that's standing open in the storm. I keep moving, I always keep moving, because the moment you stop, the moment you step off the road and into those spaces that exist in the margins of reality, you might never find your way back. And even if you do, you'll never be quite sure if you brought something back with you, some shadow or echo of that other place, riding along in your cab, waiting for the next storm, the next blackout, the next opportunity to guide you off the road and into the dark. I've always been a talker, not in the annoying way, at least I hope not, but in the sense that I need the connection, the back and forth, the sound of another human voice cutting through the loneliness of the road. 20 years of long-haul driving, and I still can't do the silent runs, the ones where you just put on music or an audiobook and zone out for 12 hours straight. I need the CB radio, need to hear other drivers out there sharing information about traffic or weather, or just shooting the breeze to pass the time. It's a lifeline, that radio, the thing that keeps you tethered to the world when everything else falls away, and it's just you and the highway and the endless miles stretching out ahead. My name is Silas Vaught, and I run freight corridors through the Mountain West, mostly Wyoming and Montana with occasional pushes into Idaho and Utah. It's hard country, beautiful but unforgiving. The kind of terrain that demands respect and punishes mistakes. High elevation routes, steep grades, weather that can turn from clear to whiteout in the span of 20 minutes. You learn to read the sky out here, learn to trust your equipment and your instincts, and most importantly, you learn to stay connected. The CB radio is more than just communication in this territory. It's survival. Other drivers warn you about black ice ahead, about road closures you won't see until you're right on top of them, about wind gusts strong enough to flip a trailer if you're not careful. Without that radio, you're driving blind, and driving blind in the mountains is a death sentence. It was late October, that narrow window between fall storms and winter lockdown when the roads are still mostly clear, but you can feel the cold settling in, getting ready to claim the high passes for the season. I was running a load of construction materials from Casper to Missoula, taking the long route through the Bighorns because the interstate was backed up with an accident, and I didn't want to lose half a day sitting in traffic. The route was scenic, winding through mountain valleys and pine forests, past reservoirs that reflected the sky like mirrors. Traffic was light, maybe one vehicle every 10 or 15 minutes, and the CB was quiet. Just the occasional check-in from other drivers or a weather update from someone further north. The sun was starting to drop behind the western peaks when I noticed the first anomaly. I was climbing up toward the Powder River Pass, the road switchbacking up the mountainside in tight curves that required constant attention, when my CB suddenly erupted with static. Not the normal background hiss you get between transmissions, but a sharp, aggressive burst that made me wince and reach for the volume knob. I turned it down, waited for the static to clear, but it just kept going, a wall of white noise that drowned out everything else. I cycled through the channels thinking maybe someone was transmitting on my frequency and causing interference, but every channel was the same. Just static, loud, and unrelenting. Then it stopped, just cut off mid-burst, leaving complete silence. Not even the background hiss, just dead air like the radio had been unplugged. I checked the power light, saw it glowing green, confirmed the unit was on and receiving. But there was nothing. No voices, no static, no indication that the airwaves existed at all. I grabbed the mic, pressed the transmit button, and said, "This is Silas Vaught. Anybody out there hearing this?" Released the button, waited. Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. "CB check. This is Silas Vaught on 19. Anybody copy?" Still nothing. The radio was working, the light was on, but it was like I was transmitting into a void, my words disappearing the moment they left the speaker. I told myself it was the terrain. Mountains play hell with radio signals, create dead zones where the waves can't penetrate or get bounced around so much they become useless. It happens all the time up here, especially in the deeper valleys or on the far side of a ridge. You lose signal, drive a few miles, and it comes back like nothing happened. No big deal. But something about this felt different, felt deliberate somehow. Like the silence wasn't just absence, but presence. Something actively blocking the signal rather than the signal simply not reaching. I shook off the thought, focused on driving, and told myself I'd get through the pass and everything would normalize on the other side. The road leveled out at the summit, a flat stretch maybe half a mile long before it started descending again into the next valley. There was a pull-off here, a scenic overlook where tourists stopped to take pictures of the mountains rolling away in every direction. I'd been meaning to take a break anyway, stretch my legs and check the load, so I pulled in, set the brakes, and climbed out. The air was thin and cold up here, sharp in my lungs, and the wind cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there. The sun was lower now, painting the peaks in shades of orange and red, and the shadows in the valleys were deep and dark, already touched by the night that was coming. I walked around the truck, checked the straps on the load, made sure nothing had shifted during the climb. Everything looked good. The refrigeration unit on the back of the trailer was humming along, keeping the perishables at the right temperature, and the tires were holding pressure despite the elevation. I pulled out my phone, thinking I'd check the weather, maybe call dispatch and let them know I was making good time. But when I looked at the screen, there was no signal. Not just weak signal, not 1 or 2 bars, but nothing. The icon showed a circle with a line through it, the universal symbol for no service, and when I tried to place a call anyway, I got a recorded message telling me the network was unavailable. That bothered me more than the CB going silent. Cell service up here was spotty, sure, but I'd been through this pass a dozen times and I'd always had at least some signal at the summit, enough to make a call or send a text if I needed to. Losing both the radio and the phone at the same time felt wrong, felt like more than coincidence. I stood there in the cold wind, staring at my phone, and felt a prickle of unease run down my spine. The overlook was empty. No other vehicles, no tourists taking pictures, just me and the truck, and the vast expanse of mountains and sky. It was beautiful and lonely, and suddenly oppressive. Like the silence itself had weight, like it was pressing down on me from above. I got back in the cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the overlook, eager to get moving again, to put some distance between me and that silent summit. The road descended in long, sweeping curves, dropping down into a valley where the trees grew thick and close to the highway. The sun disappeared behind the peaks, and the light took on that gray, fading quality it gets right before dark, when everything loses definition and shadows blend together. I turned on my headlights more for visibility than because I needed them yet, and kept my speed moderate, not wanting to push it on unfamiliar corners. That's when the CB crackled to life again. Not static this time, but a voice. Clear and close, like the speaker was right next to me. "Silas Vaught, you copy?" I grabbed the mic so fast I almost dropped it, relief flooding through me. Someone had heard my earlier transmission, was responding, breaking through whatever dead zone I'd driven into. I pressed the button, spoke quickly. "Yeah, I copy. This is Silas. Who's this?" There was a pause, just long enough to make me wonder if I'd lost them, and then the voice came back. "Dorian Muse. I'm a technician, work on CB equipment. Been monitoring the frequencies, heard your call earlier. You having signal problems?" "Yeah," I said, glancing at the radio, at the green light that was glowing steady and normal. "Lost everything for about 20 minutes. Radio, phone, everything. Just came back a minute ago. You know what might cause that?" Another pause, longer this time. And when Dorian spoke again, his voice was different, cautious. "Where are you right now, Silas?" I checked my GPS, gave him my location. "Coming down the east side of Powder River Pass, about 5 miles from the valley floor. Why?" "Because that area is known for signal anomalies," Dorian said. And I could hear something in his voice now. Something that sounded like concern, or maybe warning. "There's a zone that stretches through those mountains, maybe 10 or 15 miles across, where electronics don't work right. Radios cut out, phones die. Even GPS units start giving wrong coordinates. Nobody knows why. Some people say it's magnetic interference from mineral deposits. Others think it's something about the topology, the way the mountains block and reflect signals. But drivers report weird things in that zone, things that don't add up." "What kind of things?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. Didn't want to hear whatever he was about to say. "Transmissions that shouldn't be possible," Dorian said slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully. "People hearing their own voices coming back on different channels, like someone recorded them and played it back. CB chatter that sounds normal, but when you try to respond, nobody's there. And some drivers say they've heard transmissions in languages that don't exist, or voices that sound human but aren't quite right, like they're being generated by something that learned to mimic speech but doesn't understand what the words mean." I felt my grip tighten on the mic, felt that unease from the overlook come rushing back. "You're saying the zone is haunted? That's what you're telling me." "I'm saying I don't know what it is," Dorian replied, his voice calm and measured. "But I know enough drivers have reported problems in that area that I monitor it when I can, try to help people through if they get stuck. You still have signal now?" I checked my phone. Still no service. I told him that, and he was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Okay, here's what I need you to do. Keep moving. Don't stop unless you have to. The zone is smaller in the valleys, bigger on the ridges. If you can make it down to the valley floor and follow the highway north, you should clear it in another hour. But if your radio starts acting strange again, if you hear things that don't make sense, don't respond. Don't engage with it. Just keep driving and wait for it to pass." "What happens if I engage with it?" I asked, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "I don't know," Dorian said, and he sounded genuinely uncertain, genuinely worried. Nobody who's done that has been able to explain what happened afterwards. They just say it felt wrong, like they were talking to something that was listening but not understanding. Something that was using their transmissions to learn how to communicate. And some of them say the thing followed them, kept trying to make contact even after they left the zone. I swallowed hard, stared out at the darkening road ahead. "You're scaring me, Dorian." "Good," he said, and there was no humor in his voice. "You should be scared. That zone isn't natural, Silas. Whatever's causing it, it's not just interference or geography. It's something else, and it's active. It's listening. And if you give it too much to work with, if you transmit too much or stay too long, it might decide to keep listening even after you're gone." We talked for a few more minutes, him giving me specific instructions about which channels to avoid and what to do if my electronics failed completely. He told me about other drivers who'd made it through, assured me it was possible to get out safely if I stayed calm and followed his advice. But underneath all that practical guidance was fear, real and palpable, the kind that comes from knowing something is wrong, but not understanding what or why. When we finally signed off, I felt more alone than I had before, more aware of the silence pressing in from outside, more conscious of the fact that I was driving through a stretch of road that apparently had a reputation for doing impossible things to electronics and the people who relied on them. The valley floor came up faster than I expected, the road leveling out and straightening as it followed a river through a narrow gorge. The trees were thick here, blocking out what little light remained, and my headlights carved tunnels through the darkness that seemed to close in behind me like a door shutting. I kept my speed steady, eyes locked on the road, trying not to think about what Dorian had said about voices that learned to mimic speech, about transmissions that shouldn't be possible. The CB stayed quiet, just that faint background hiss that told me it was on and receiving. And I left it that way. Didn't try to call anyone, didn't want to risk drawing attention to myself from whatever was out there listening. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop wondering what kind of thing could interfere with radio signals across an entire mountain range. What kind of presence could learn to imitate human voices and use them to communicate? I thought about the static burst I'd heard at the summit, the way it had felt aggressive rather than random, and I thought about the dead silence that followed, the sense that something was blocking the signal rather than the signal simply failing. And I thought about Dorian's warning, about not engaging, about not giving it too much to work with. What did that mean? What was I supposed to avoid doing? Just transmitting? Or was there more to it, some specific way of interacting that would trigger a response I didn't want? The road curved ahead, following the contours of the river, and I eased off the gas, not wanting to take the corner too fast. That's when I saw the lights. Not headlights, not taillights, just lights strung along the roadside like markers, pale and steady and completely out of place. They appeared suddenly, without warning, dozens of them arranged in a line that stretched along the shoulder for maybe a quarter mile before disappearing into the darkness ahead. I slowed down even more, staring at them, trying to figure out what they were. They looked like road flares, the kind emergency services use to mark accident scenes, but they weren't flashing, weren't orange, just white and constant and wrong. I passed the first few, watching them in my mirrors, and they didn't move, didn't react, just stayed there burning in the darkness. But as I passed more of them, I started to notice something. They were arranged in a pattern, spaced evenly, precisely, like someone had measured the distances and placed them with deliberate care. And the light they gave off didn't behave right, didn't cast shadows the way it should, didn't illuminate the ground around them. It just hung there in the air, isolated and self-contained, like it wasn't part of the same physical world as everything else. The CB crackled again, and my heart jumped. But this time, it wasn't Dorian's voice. It was mine. "This is Silas Vaught. Anybody out there hearing this?" My own words, my own voice played back exactly as I'd spoken them earlier. I stared at the radio, at the green light that was glowing steady, and felt ice settle in my stomach. The transmission continued, My voice asking for a CB check, asking if anyone could copy, the exact words I'd used when I first lost signal. Then silence, and after a moment, another voice, unfamiliar, responding. Silas Vaught, this is Dorian Muse. I'm a technician, work on CB equipment. It was playing back our entire conversation, word for word like a recording. But it wasn't a recording, couldn't be, because the voices had that live quality, that immediate presence that tells you someone is speaking in real time. I reached for the power button, ready to shut the radio off, but before I could touch it, the transmission cut out, replaced by that same aggressive static I'd heard at the summit. And underneath the static, barely audible, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow and steady and deliberate, like something was listening to the static, learning its patterns, figuring out how to use it. I shut the radio off, watched the green light go dark, and focused on driving. The lights along the roadside continued for another mile before finally disappearing, winking out one by one until there was nothing but darkness and the narrow tunnel of my headlights. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I could feel sweat on my forehead despite the cold. Whatever was in that zone, whatever Dorian had warned me about, I'd just encountered it. And it had used my own voice against me, had played back my words like it was trying to understand them, trying to figure out what they meant and how to use them for itself. I drove in silence for the next hour. No radio, no music, just the sound of the engine and the tires on pavement, and my own breathing. The valley eventually widened, the trees thinned out, and I saw lights ahead, real lights. The glow of a small town spilling across the landscape. I'd never been so relieved to see civilization, so grateful for the simple evidence that other people existed, that I wasn't alone out here with whatever was haunting that mountain pass. I pulled into the first gas station I found, parked under the bright fluorescent lights, and just sat there for a while, letting the normalcy of the place wash over me. People pumping gas, cars coming and going, the ordinary rhythm of life that felt miraculous after what I'd just driven through. My phone buzzed, and I grabbed it, saw that I had signal again, full bars, messages and notifications flooding in. I called Dorian's number, the one he'd given me during our conversation, and waited while it rang. He answered on the third ring. "Silas, you make it through?" "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "Yeah, I made it. But it played back our conversation, Dorian, word for word. And there were lights on the roadside, white lights that didn't cast shadows. What the hell was that?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was grim. "That's worse than most reports I've heard. Usually it just mimics a few words, tries to engage. But if it played back the whole conversation, if it was paying that much attention, then it marked you. Locked onto your signal and learned your patterns." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "It means you're on its radar now," Dorian said. "It knows your voice, knows how you communicate. And next time you're in the zone, it'll be waiting. It'll try to engage again, try to learn more. The question is whether you give it the chance." I spent the night in that small town, parked at a truck stop with a dozen other rigs, engine idling, doors locked. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by dreams of static and voices that sounded like mine but weren't. Voices that spoke words I'd never said but somehow recognized. Every time I woke up, I'd check my phone, make sure I still had signal, make sure I was still connected to the world in some tangible way. The green glow of the screen became a comfort, proof that I was out of the zone, that whatever had been listening to me in those mountains hadn't followed me here. But Dorian's words kept echoing in my head. "It marked you. Next time you're in the zone, it'll be waiting." I didn't want there to be a next time. Didn't want to go anywhere near that stretch of highway again. But my route took me through those mountains twice a month, sometimes more, and avoiding them would mean turning down loads, losing money, raising questions I didn't want to answer. So, when morning came and dispatch called with another run that would take me back through Wyoming, I accepted it, told myself I'd be fine, told myself that whatever I'd encountered was just a glitch, an anomaly, nothing more. The next 2 weeks passed normally. I ran routes through Colorado and Utah, stayed away from the mountain passes, kept my radio on and my phone charged, and tried not to think about the zone or what had happened there. Dorian called a few times, checking in, asking if I'd experienced any more problems. I told him no, everything was fine, and he seemed relieved, but not surprised. The zone is localized, he explained during one of our conversations. As long as you're not in that specific area, you're safe. It doesn't reach out beyond its boundaries, at least, not that I've ever heard. But there was doubt in his voice when he said it, a hesitation that suggested he wasn't entirely certain, that he'd heard stories that contradicted what he was telling me, but didn't want to share them. I didn't push him on it, didn't want to know. Ignorance felt safer than knowledge, felt like a shield I could hide behind as long as I didn't ask too many questions. So I drove, made my deliveries, collected my pay, and pretended everything was normal. Pretended I hadn't heard my own voice coming out of a radio that shouldn't have been recording anything. Pretended I hadn't seen lights that defied physics hanging in the darkness. It was mid-November when dispatch assigned me a load that would take me back through the Bighorns. Heavy equipment, construction grade, needed in Billings by the end of the week. The route was straightforward, the weather forecast was clear, and the money was good enough that I couldn't justify turning it down. I accepted the job, loaded up, and headed north, telling myself I'd be fine, that I'd learned from the last encounter and knew what to expect. But as I got closer to Wyoming, as the mountains began to rise up on the horizon, that old fear came creeping back, settling in my gut like a stone. I hit Powder River Pass just after noon, the sun high and bright, visibility perfect. The road was clear, traffic light, conditions about as good as you could ask for. I kept my CB on but didn't transmit. Didn't want to announce my presence to whatever might be listening. My phone showed full signal, 5 bars, and I kept it on the dash where I could see it, watching for the moment when those bars would start to drop. The climb up to the summit was uneventful. No static bursts, no dead zones, just normal road noise and the hum of the engine. I started to relax, started to think maybe I'd been lucky. Maybe the zone was inactive today, or maybe it had moved somewhere else. Then I crested the summit and the phone went dark. Not dead, not powered off, just dark. The screen showed nothing, no icons, no time, just black glass reflecting my face. I picked it up, pressed the power button, held it down, but nothing happened. The phone was on. I could feel it warm in my hand, but it wasn't responding, wasn't displaying anything. I set it back on the dash and checked the CB. The green light was glowing, the unit was receiving, but there was no sound, no background hiss, just that same hollow silence I remembered from before. My heart started to pound, adrenaline kicking in even though nothing had actually happened yet. Nothing had threatened me, but I knew what was coming, knew this was the beginning of whatever the zone wanted to do. I kept driving, eyes locked on the road, watching for those white lights that didn't cast shadows, listening for my own voice to come crackling out of the speakers. The descent into the valley felt longer this time, the curves tighter, the shadows deeper. The sun was still up, but the light felt muted somehow, filtered, like I was seeing it through a lens that stripped away its warmth. Then the CB crackled, and I tensed, waited for the playback to start, for my voice to echo back at me. but it wasn't my voice. It was someone else's, a woman, calm and professional. "Westbound traffic, be advised. There's a disabled vehicle at mile marker 42. Emergency services are en route. Use caution." It was the kind of transmission you heard a dozen times a day. Routine traffic information, nothing unusual. I almost responded, almost keyed the mic to acknowledge the warning, but something stopped me. The voice was too perfect, too precise, like it had been constructed rather than spoken, like someone had assembled it from pieces of other transmissions and stitched them together into something that sounded natural but wasn't. I checked my GPS for mile marker 42. It was 3 miles ahead, right in the heart of the valley. I slowed down, scanning the roadside, looking for the disabled vehicle or emergency lights or any sign of the incident the voice had warned about. But there was nothing, just empty highway. Trees pressing in from both sides, no vehicles, no people, no evidence of any problem. I passed mile marker 42 and kept going, waiting for something to appear, but the road stayed empty. The transmission had been fake, a lure, trying to get me to respond, trying to get me to engage. The CB crackled again, the same voice, the same words. "Westbound traffic, be advised. There's a disabled vehicle at mile marker 42. Emergency services are en route. Use caution." Identical to the first transmission, down to the inflection and timing. A loop, playing over and over, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. I reached for the power button, ready to shut the radio off, but before I could touch it, a different voice came through. Male this time, urgent. "Any units near mile 42, we need assistance. Drivers unresponsive, possible medical emergency." I froze, hand hovering over the button. This was different, more detailed, more specific. If it was real, if someone actually needed help, I couldn't just ignore it. But if it was another fake, another attempt to draw me in, responding could be exactly what the zone wanted. I grabbed my phone, tried to call dispatch, tried to verify the transmission, but the screen was still dark, still unresponsive. I was on my own, had to make the call based on instinct alone. And my instinct was screaming that this was wrong, that no legitimate emergency would be announced on a random CB channel with no follow-up, no official protocols. I kept driving, didn't respond, didn't stop, just maintained speed and watched the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The transmissions continued, cycling through the same warnings and requests, always about mile marker 42, always urgent but never quite convincing. After a while, they started to blend together. Different voices saying the same things, like the zone was testing variations, trying to figure out which combination would work, which sequence of words would trigger a response. It felt calculated, methodical, like I was being studied by something that understood cause and effect, but not emotion. Something that knew humans responded to distress calls but didn't understand why. The valley floor leveled out and the highway straightened, following the river north. The transmission stopped abruptly, replaced by that dead silence again, and I thought maybe I'd cleared the zone, maybe I was past the worst of it. But then my phone lit up, the screen blazing bright, and I saw that I had 47 missed calls. All from the same number. All from Dorian. I stared at the screen, watched the notification count climbing, 48, 49, 50. Calls coming in faster than they could register. But the phone wasn't ringing, wasn't making any sound, just silently logging call after call after call. I answered it, pressed the green button and raised the phone to my ear. Static, loud and aggressive. The same burst I'd heard at the summit weeks ago. I pulled the phone away, looked at the screen, saw that the call was connected, that the timer was running. But all I could hear was static. punctuated by something that might have been breathing or might have been the rhythm of the noise itself, organized into patterns that sounded organic. I ended the call, watched the screen go dark again, and set the phone back on the dash with hands that were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The CB came to life again, but this time it was Dorian's voice, or something that sounded like Dorian's voice. "Silas, you need to stop. Pull over. We need to talk about what's happening." The words were right. The tone was close. But something about the cadence was off, the spaces between words just slightly wrong. Like whoever or whatever was speaking had studied Dorian's speech patterns but couldn't quite replicate them naturally. "Silas, I can help you, but you need to stop driving. You need to listen to me." I gripped the wheel tighter, forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. This was what Dorian had warned me about, what he'd told me not to engage with. The zone was using voices I trusted, trying to make me believe I was talking to someone real, someone who could help. But it wasn't real. It was mimicry, imitation, a predator using camouflage to draw in prey. I reached over and turned the CB volume down to 0. Didn't shut it off completely, but muted it so I wouldn't have to hear whatever else it decided to say. The highway climbed out of the valley, switchbacking up the western slope of the range. And I pushed the truck harder than I should have, taking the curves faster than was safe, desperate to get out of this zone, to reach clear air where electronics worked normally and voices meant what they said. The sun was dropping toward the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and the shadows were getting longer, deeper, pooling in the low spots and spreading up the mountainside like water rising. I hated that I was still in the mountains when dark was coming. Hated that I'd have to drive through this terrain without the safety of daylight. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder ahead, hazard lights flashing, hood propped open like the driver was having engine trouble. As I got closer, I could see someone standing next to it, waving their arms, trying to flag me down. Standard procedure would be to stop, offer help, make sure they weren't stranded without communication. But something about the way the figure moved was wrong. Too smooth, too fluid, like they were gliding rather than walking. And the truck itself looked strange. The paint too perfect, the chrome too bright, like it had just rolled off a showroom floor instead of spending years on the highway accumulating dents and road grime. I slowed down slightly, not wanting to blow past too fast in case it was a legitimate emergency, but I didn't stop. As I passed, I got a better look at the figure, and my blood ran cold. It didn't have a face, or rather, it had the suggestion of a face. A blank oval where features should have been, smooth and featureless and wrong. The arms kept waving, the body kept moving, but that empty space where eyes and mouth and nose should have been just stared at me, or would have stared if there were eyes to stare with. I hit the gas, sped up, watching in the mirror as the figure grew smaller and finally disappeared around a curve. The truck on the shoulder was gone when I checked again, just empty pavement where it had been parked. No tire marks, no oil stains, nothing to indicate a vehicle had ever been there. I was breathing hard now, hands locked on the wheel, every nerve screaming at me to get out, to get clear, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was happening in these mountains. The CB was still muted, but I could see the lights flashing on the display, indicating transmissions coming through. The zone still trying to communicate, still trying to draw me in. I drove for another 30 minutes before the highway finally crested the western ridge and started its descent toward the plains beyond. The terrain opened up, the trees thinned out, and I could see for miles in every direction. See the flat expanse of grassland stretching away toward the horizon. My phone buzzed suddenly, startling me so badly I almost swerved. I grabbed it, saw that I had a text message from Dorian. Real Dorian this time, I hoped. The message was short. Are you clear? Call me when you can. I pulled over at the first rest area I found, parked in a well-lit spot near other trucks, and sat there for a minute just breathing, letting the adrenaline drain away. My hands were still shaking and I could feel sweat cooling on my forehead, making me shiver in the heated cab. I checked my surroundings, made sure I was really out of the mountains, really in safe territory before I called Dorian back. He answered immediately. Silas, you okay? Yeah, I said, though my voice was rough. Yeah, I'm clear. But Dorian, it was worse this time. Way worse. It used your voice, called my phone 50 times, showed me a truck on the roadside with someone who didn't have a face. What the hell is this thing? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was grim. I don't know. I've been researching it, talking to other drivers, trying to piece together what's actually happening in that zone. And the more I learn, the less sense it makes. It's not just radio interference, Silas. It's intelligent. It studies people, learns how they communicate, and uses that information to interact with them. Some drivers report it perfectly mimicking loved ones, using names and details it shouldn't know. Others say it creates entire scenarios, fake accidents or emergencies, trying to get people to stop. Why? I asked. What does it want? I think it wants to understand us, Dorian said slowly. I think it's trying to figure out how humans work, how we think and communicate, and make decisions. And the best way to do that is to interact with us, to test different approaches and see what gets a response. But here's the thing, Silas. The drivers who engage with it, who stop and investigate or respond to the transmissions, they report losing time. Hours, sometimes days, just gone. They remember pulling over, remember starting to interact with whatever contacted them, and then they're waking up miles away with no memory of how they got there. I felt cold settle into my bones, deeper than the temperature, deeper than the fear. You think it's abducting people? I don't know what it's doing, Dorian admitted. But I know it's dangerous, and I know the more you engage with it, the more control it seems to gain. That's why I keep telling you not to respond, not to stop. As long as you keep moving, as long as you don't give it an opening, it can't do more than try to lure you in. But if you stop, if you acknowledge it, you're giving it permission to escalate. We talked for another 20 minutes, him walking me through everything I'd experienced, taking notes, adding my encounter to whatever database he was building. He told me other drivers had reported similar experiences. The fake emergency transmissions, the impossible phone calls, the roadside apparitions. It was a pattern, consistent and repeating, which suggested the zone operated according to rules, even if we didn't understand what those rules were. And that gave me some small measure of comfort, the idea that this wasn't random, that there were boundaries even if they weren't clearly marked. I need to ask you something, I said, as the conversation was winding down. Have you ever been through the zone yourself, or are you just collecting stories from other drivers? There was a long silence, long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then Dorian spoke, and his voice was different, quieter, haunted. I went through it once, 5 years ago. I was running a load through the Bighorns, lost signal just like you did. I started hearing transmissions that didn't make sense. And I stopped, Silas. I pulled over to check my equipment, thought maybe something was wrong with my antenna or my power supply. And while I was standing there on the shoulder trying to figure out what was happening, I heard my daughter's voice on the CB. She was 7 at the time, shouldn't have known how to use a radio, shouldn't have even been near one. But there she was, calling for me, saying she was scared, saying she needed help. He paused, and I could hear him breathing, could hear the weight of the memory in the silence. I responded, grabbed the mic and started talking to her, asking where she was, telling her daddy was coming. And that's the last thing I remember clearly. Next thing I knew, I was waking up in my truck 50 miles down the highway, 6 hours gone. No memory of driving that distance. My daughter was fine, was at home with my wife the whole time, never touched a radio. But something happened to me in those 6 hours, something I can't remember but can feel. Like a piece of me got left behind in that zone. Like part of my consciousness is still there, still responding to that voice that sounded like my daughter but wasn't. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't have words adequate to address what he was telling me. So I just listened as he continued. That's why I monitor the zone now. That's why I try to help drivers who get caught in it. Because I know what it's like to be lured in, to hear something that sounds so real, so genuine, that you can't help but respond. And I know what it costs. I'm trying to make sure nobody else has to pay that price. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I can't imagine what that's like, not knowing what happened, always wondering. The not knowing is the worst part, Dorian agreed. But I've learned to live with it. And I've learned enough about the zone to help other people avoid what happened to me. So, when I tell you to keep driving, to not engage, it's not just theory, it's survival. That thing in the mountains, whatever it is, it's patient, and it's smart, and it will use everything you care about against you if you give it the chance. We ended the call shortly after that, both of us needing time to process, to settle back into our separate realities. I sat in the truck for a while longer, watching other drivers come and go, envying their normal routes, their ordinary problems. They didn't know how lucky they were driving roads that followed expected patterns, that didn't reach out and try to pull you into spaces where the rules stopped applying. I thought about Dorian's daughter, about the voice that had called to him, and I wondered what voice the zone would use on me if I ever gave it the chance. Whose face would it wear? Whose words would it speak to make me stop and listen? I didn't want to find out. Didn't want to become another story in Dorian's collection. Another driver who'd lost time and memory and pieces of themselves to whatever haunted those mountains. So I made a decision right there. Sitting in that rest area with the engine idling and the lights bright around me. I'd run other routes, take different corridors, find ways to make a living that didn't require passing through that zone. It would cost me money, would limit my options, but it was better than the alternative. Better than stopping on a dark shoulder and hearing a voice I recognized calling out to me. Better than waking up miles away with hours gone and no memory of what I'd done or what had been done to me. I pulled out of the rest area and headed north, away from the mountains, toward flatter country where the roads were straight and the signals were strong, and the only voices on the CB belonged to real people driving real trucks. The sunset painted the sky behind me in colors I didn't look back at, didn't want to acknowledge. Like the mountains themselves were burning, trying to hold my attention one last time. But I kept my eyes forward, kept moving, and by the time full dark settled in, I was 100 miles clear, crossing into Montana where the terrain was different, where the zone's reach couldn't follow. Or, at least, that's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. Because the alternative, the possibility that Dorian was wrong about the boundaries, that the zone could reach further than he thought, was too terrifying to consider. So I drove, made my delivery, and tried to forget about the faceless figure waving on the shoulder, about the truck that vanished, about my own voice coming back at me through speakers that shouldn't have been recording anything. Tried to forget, and mostly succeeded, except in the quiet moments before sleep when the memories would surface, and I'd lie awake wondering what might have happened if I'd stopped, if I'd engaged, if I'd given the zone permission to show me what it really was. I managed to avoid the bighorns for almost a month. Took loads that sent me south into Colorado or west toward Idaho. routes that added miles and time, but kept me clear of that stretch of highway where the zone waited. Dispatch noticed, but didn't comment. Probably figured I had personal reasons for preferring certain corridors, and as long as I kept making deliveries, they were willing to accommodate me. The extra miles cut into my profit margins, made the runs less efficient, but I told myself it was worth it. Money could be replaced. Whatever I might lose to the zone couldn't, but the work was drying up. Winter was settling in hard across the mountain west, closing high passes and making the roads treacherous, and the loads that did come through were concentrated on the major routes, the ones that got plowed and maintained regardless of conditions. And one of those routes unavoidably was the highway through the Bighorns. When dispatch called in mid-December with a high-paying emergency load that needed to reach Billings within 24 hours, I knew I didn't have a choice. The money was too good to turn down, and turning it down would raise questions I still didn't want to answer. So I accepted the job, loaded up, and started driving north, trying to convince myself that I'd learned enough to handle whatever the zone threw at me. I called Dorian before I left, told him I was going back in, asked if he had any new advice. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Just remember what I told you. Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't engage. The zone can't hold you if you don't give it permission. And Silas, if things get bad, if you feel like you're losing control, there's a motel about 15 miles past the summit. Place called the Lodgepole Inn. Owner's name is Claire Renwick. She knows about the zone, understands what drivers go through there. If you need a safe place to stop, that's it. Tell her I sent you." I wrote down the name, thanked him, and ended the call. The fact that there was a safe place, a refuge in the middle of this nightmare territory, gave me some comfort. But it also raised questions. How did this Claire Renwick know about the zone? How many drivers had stopped there seeking shelter from whatever haunted those mountains? And most importantly, if the zone was as intelligent and adaptive as Dorian believed, why hadn't it learned to mimic her place the way it mimicked everything else? The drive up to Wyoming was uneventful. Clear roads and light traffic. Weather holding cold but stable. I made good time, pushed through the hours with coffee and determination, trying not to think about what was waiting for me in the mountains. But as the Bighorns rose up on the horizon, dark and massive against the pale winter sky, I felt that familiar dread settling in my gut. That cold certainty that I was driving towards something that wanted to pull me off the road and into spaces where normal rules didn't apply. I hit Powder River Pass just after sunset, the sky fading from gray to black. Stars beginning to appear in the gaps between clouds. The temperature was dropping fast, cold enough that I could see my breath inside the cab despite the heater running full blast. My CB was on, volume low, and my phone was charged and ready on the dash. I'd learned to watch for the signs, the moment when signal started to degrade, when the background hiss of the radio changed quality. And I knew it was coming, knew the zone would activate the moment I crossed some invisible boundary. But I still wasn't prepared for how sudden it was. One moment I had full signal, 5 bars, radio crackling with distant chatter from other drivers. The next moment everything went silent. Phone screen went dark, radio cut to that hollow dead air. Even the GPS flickered and died, leaving me with nothing but the glow of the dashboard lights and the tunnel of my headlights cutting through the darkness. I gripped the wheel tighter, forced myself to breathe slowly, and kept driving. This was expected. This was the pattern. As long as I kept moving, as long as I didn't stop, I'd make it through. The road descended into the valley, curves tight and steep, requiring constant attention. Snow was starting to fall, light flurries that swirled in the headlight beams and stuck to the windshield before the wipers swept them away. Visibility was dropping, and I slowed down, not wanting to take the corners too fast in these conditions. The CB remained silent for the first 10 minutes, just that empty dead air, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the transmission started. The zone was patient, liked to let you settle into the silence before it reached out, before it tried to make contact. Then it came, not a voice this time, but music. Old country music, the kind you'd hear on AM radio stations in rural areas, all twang and steel guitar and lyrics about heartbreak and whiskey. It sounded genuine at first, like I'd accidentally tuned into a broadcast, but as I listened, I realized the song was wrong. The melody was familiar, but the lyrics didn't match any version I'd heard, and the singer's voice had that same artificial quality I'd noticed before, like it was being generated rather than performed. The words were about driving, about being alone on dark highways, about voices calling from the side of the road. And as the song continued, the lyrics became more specific, more personal, mentioning my name, describing my truck, talking about the zone like it was a living thing that knew I was there. I reached over and muted the CB, but the music continued, bleeding through even with the volume at 0. I could hear it faintly, like it was coming from inside the speakers themselves, generated by some process that didn't need electrical power to function. The song shifted, changed tempo, and now the voice was singing about stopping, about rest, about finding shelter from the cold and the dark. It sounded inviting, seductive, like a lullaby designed to make you drowsy, to lower your defenses. I shook my head, forced myself to focus on the road, on the white lines barely visible through the snow. The music faded after a few minutes, replaced by that dead silence again. But I could feel the zone's presence now, could feel it pressing in from all sides like a physical weight. The darkness beyond my headlights seemed thicker, more substantial, like it was made of something other than absence of light, and the road itself felt different. The curves coming up in unexpected places, the mile markers appearing out of sequence. I checked my GPS out of habit, even though I knew it was dead, and sure enough, the screen showed nothing, just black glass. That's when I saw the sign for the Lodgepole Inn. It appeared suddenly in my headlights, a wooden board mounted on posts at the side of the road, hand-painted letters spelling out Lodgepole Inn, vacancy, next right. An arrow pointed toward an off-ramp I hadn't noticed before, a narrow exit that curved away into the trees. I slowed down, staring at the sign, trying to decide if it was real or another trick, another lure designed to get me off the highway. Dorian had mentioned the motel, had given me the name and told me it was safe. But could I trust that? Could I be sure the zone hadn't learned about the motel and created a fake version, using the name to draw me in? I almost drove past it. Almost kept going straight, trusting that forward momentum was safer than any exit, no matter how legitimate it seemed. But something made me hesitate, made me ease off the gas and guide the truck toward the off-ramp. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the simple human need for shelter, for a place to rest that wasn't the cramped cab of a truck rolling through darkness. Whatever the reason, I took the exit, following the narrow road as it wound through pine trees that pressed in close on both sides, branches scraping against the trailer. The road climbed slightly, then leveled out into a small clearing, and there it was, the Lodgepole Inn. A single-story building, maybe a dozen rooms, painted pale yellow with brown trim. There was a small office at one end with a neon vacancy sign glowing red in the window, and a handful of vehicles parked in the lot, regular cars and one other semi-truck. Warm light spilled from some of the room windows, and I could see smoke rising from a chimney, dispersing into the snowy darkness. It looked real, looked solid and ordinary, and exactly like what it claimed to be, a small roadside motel offering shelter to travelers. but I'd learned not to trust appearances. I parked the truck at the far end of the lot, positioned so I could see both the office and the exit, and sat there for a minute with the engine running, watching for anything that might give away a deception. The other truck in the lot looked lived in, legitimate, with mud on the fenders and road grime on the chrome. The cars had license plates, visible damage, normal wear and tear. And through the office window I could see movement. Someone behind the counter, real and solid and human-shaped. I checked my phone. Still no signal. Checked the CB. Still dead air. If this was the zone's creation, it was the most elaborate one yet. I climbed out of the cab, locked the doors, and walked across the lot to the office. The cold hit me immediately, wind cutting through my jacket, and I hunched my shoulders against it, moving quickly. The door had a small bell that jingled when I pushed it open, and the warmth inside was immediate and welcome, heat radiating from a wood stove in the corner. The office was small but clean. Wood-paneled walls covered with old photographs and road maps, a counter with a register and a rack of keys behind it. And behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing a flannel shirt and reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. She looked up when I entered, and her expression shifted from neutral to knowing, like she'd seen my face before or recognized something in the way I carried myself. "You came through the zone," she said, and it wasn't a question. "You've got that look, like you're not sure if you're still dreaming or if this is real." I stood there for a moment, not sure how to respond, and finally just nodded. "Dorian Muse told me about this place. Said you know what's happening out there." Her expression softened, and she nodded. "Dorian's a good man. Sent a lot of drivers my way over the years. I'm Claire Renwick. I own this place. And yes, I know about the zone. Hard not to, when your motel sits right at its edge. You looking for a room?" "Yeah," I said, and I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. "Yeah, I need to stop for the night, make sure I'm still in one piece before I keep going." Claire pulled a registration card from beneath the counter, slid it across to me along with a pen. $50, includes breakfast. Coffee's always on in the lobby. Room 7 is open, nice and quiet, away from the road. She paused, studying me. "You experience anything specific out there? Anything I should know about?" I filled out the card, hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Music. Old country music with wrong lyrics. And the road felt wrong, like the curves weren't where they should be. But I didn't stop, didn't respond to anything. Just kept driving until I saw your sign. Claire nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd suspected. "The music's new, or newer anyway. Started hearing about that maybe 6 months ago. Before that, it was mostly voices, fake transmissions, things like that. But it's learning, adapting, trying new approaches." She took the card back, filed it away, and handed me a key. "Room 7, like I said, try to get some rest. The zone doesn't reach inside these walls, at least not in any way I've ever noticed. You're safe here." "Why doesn't it?" I asked, the question spilling out before I could stop it. If it's as smart as everyone says, if it can mimic anything, why hasn't it learned to fake this place? Why isn't there a duplicate lodgepole inn out there somewhere, luring drivers in? Claire smiled, small and sad. Because I asked it not to. She saw my confusion and continued. 20 years ago, when I first bought this place, I started noticing the patterns. Drivers coming through talking about lost time, strange transmissions, things that shouldn't be possible. And I started documenting it, keeping records, trying to understand what was happening. And one night, when the zone was particularly active, I went out to the edge of the property and I talked to it. Just stood there in the dark and spoke out loud, told it what I knew, what I'd figured out. And I made a deal. I stared at her, not sure if I was hearing this right. You made a deal with it. I offered it something it wanted, Claire said simply. Information, stories. Every driver who stops here and tells me what they experienced, I write it down. Keep detailed records of the zone's behavior, its patterns, its evolution. And in exchange, it leaves this place alone. Doesn't mimic it, doesn't interfere with it, lets it exist as a genuine safe space. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I know how it sounds, believe me, I know. But it works. This motel has been here for 20 years in the middle of zone territory, and not once has a driver reported seeing a fake version of it. That's not coincidence. I didn't know what to say to that. The idea that someone had negotiated with the zone, had established boundaries and rules with something that shouldn't even be capable of understanding human concepts like agreements and territory, was almost harder to believe than the zone's existence itself. But I was standing in a warm room that felt real and solid, talking to a person who seemed entirely genuine, and my instincts told me she was telling the truth. Or at least believed she was telling the truth, which in this context might be the same thing. So, what is it? I asked. What's actually out there in those mountains? Claire shook her head slowly. I don't know, not really. I've got theories, same as everyone else. Some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. A pocket of reality that doesn't quite align with the rest of the world. Maybe something left over from whatever existed here before the roads were built. Some presence that got trapped or awakened when we started cutting through the mountains. But theories don't matter much when you're face to face with it. What matters is knowing how to survive it, how to recognize its patterns, and avoid giving it what it wants. And what does it want? I asked. To understand, Claire said. To learn how we work, how we think. It studies us the way a scientist studies an organism under a microscope. And the more we interact with it, the more data we give it, the better it gets at mimicking us. That's why Dorian tells people not to engage, not to respond. Every transmission you acknowledge, every question you answer teaches it something new. And eventually it gets so good at pretending to be human that you can't tell the difference anymore. That's when people disappear, when they get so convinced they're talking to something real that they follow it right off the edge of the world. I thought about the faceless figure I'd seen waving on the roadside, about the music with my name in the lyrics, about all the ways the zone had tried to get my attention, and I thought about Dorian losing 6 hours, waking up miles away with no memory of what had happened. Has anyone ever come back from that? I asked, from following it off the edge. Some, Claire said, but they're never quite right afterwards. Something gets left behind, or something comes back with them. Hard to say which. They function, they drive, they live their lives, but there's a hollowness to them, a disconnect. Like they're operating on autopilot and the person they used to be is somewhere else, still trapped in whatever space the zone opened up for them. We talked for a while longer, Claire sharing stories from other drivers, building a picture of the zone's capabilities and limitations. She showed me her records, thick notebooks filled with handwritten accounts, dates and times, and detailed descriptions of encounters. It was impressive, methodical, the kind of documentation that would be valuable to researchers if anyone official would take the report seriously. But she wasn't doing it for science or recognition. She was doing it because the deal she'd made required it. Because keeping the zone satisfied with information was the price of maintaining this safe space. I took the key to room 7, thanked her, and walked back out into the cold. The snow was falling heavier now, accumulating on the ground, and my truck was already wearing a white coat. I grabbed my overnight bag from the cab, checked that everything was locked up tight, and headed for my room. The key worked smoothly in the lock and the door opened onto a simple but clean space. Bed, Dresser, small TV, bathroom with a shower. Normal, ordinary, safe. I locked the door behind me, drew the curtains, and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing myself to relax. The room was warm, quiet, insulated from the wind and snow outside. I could hear faint sounds from neighboring rooms, a TV playing, someone moving around, normal hotel noises that felt reassuring in their mundanity. I pulled out my phone, checked it out of habit. Still no signal, but somehow that felt less threatening here, less like being cut off from the world and more like a temporary inconvenience. I took a shower, washing away the sweat and tension of the drive, and when I came out the mirror was fogged and the bathroom was full of steam. I wiped a clear spot on the glass to shave, and that's when I noticed it. Writing on the mirror, revealed by the condensation, like someone had traced letters on the surface, and the moisture was making them visible. The message was short. You didn't stop. I stared at it, heart suddenly pounding, hand frozen with the razor halfway to my face. The words were right there, clear and undeniable, written in what looked like a finger traced through condensation. But I was alone in the room, had been alone since I locked the door, and the mirror had been clear when I started the shower. I reached out slowly, touched the glass where the words appeared. It was cold, colder than it should be, like something on the other side was drawing heat away from it. I grabbed a towel and wiped the mirror clean, erasing the message, and quickly finished shaving with shaking hands. Then I went back into the main room, checked the door lock, checked the windows, made sure everything was secure. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked disturbed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in here with me, something that had watched me drive through the zone, that had noticed I hadn't stopped, and that wanted me to know it had noticed. I called Dorian from the room phone, the old landline on the nightstand, and he picked up on the second ring. "Silas? You at Claire's place?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice low. "Yeah, I'm here, but Dorian, something's in the room. Left a message on the bathroom mirror. You didn't stop." "What the hell does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "It means the zone is acknowledging that you resisted, that you didn't give it what it wanted. Sometimes it does that, leaves markers for drivers who manage to pass through without engaging, like it's keeping score, tracking who's playing the game and who's ignoring it." "Is it a threat?" I asked. "I don't think so," Dorian said. "More like recognition. But Silas, listen to me. You need to leave first thing in the morning. Don't stay there longer than necessary. Claire's place is safe, but the zone surrounds it. And the longer you stay, the more time it has to study you, to figure out new approaches. You survived the drive-through, that's good. Now you need to finish the run and get clear." We talked for a few more minutes, him reassuring me that the message was nothing to panic about, that it was just the zone's way of making its presence known. But I could hear the undercurrent of concern in his voice, could tell he was more worried than he wanted to let on. When we hung up, I sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the bathroom door, thinking about those words appearing in the condensation. You didn't stop. It sounded like observation, like acknowledgement. But it also sounded like a promise, like the zone was saying, not this time, but maybe next time. Maybe next time you'll stop, and then we'll see what happens. I barely slept that night, drifting in and out of shallow dreams where I was driving through darkness, and voices were calling to me from the roadside. Voices I recognized but couldn't quite place. Every time I woke up, I'd check the room, make sure I was still alone, make sure the door was still locked, and the windows were still secure. And each time I checked, everything was normal, everything was fine. But the unease never left, that feeling of being watched, being studied, being marked as someone who'd passed through the zone's territory and lived to tell about it. Morning came gray and cold, snow still falling but lighter now. I packed my things, checked out with Claire, and she handed me a thermos of coffee and a paper bag with a breakfast sandwich. "For the road," she said. "And Silas, be careful out there. The zone's been more active lately, more aggressive. Whatever it is, it's getting stronger or smarter, or both. And drivers like you, who resist it, who refuse to engage, you're more interesting to it than the ones who stop. Because you're the challenge, the puzzle it hasn't solved yet." I thanked her, took the food and coffee, and headed back to my truck. The morning air was sharp and clean, the snow crunching under my boots, and everything looked peaceful, normal, safe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in the trees or the shadows or the spaces between falling snowflakes, something was observing, taking notes, preparing for the next encounter. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot back onto the narrow road that would take me to the highway. My phone came to life the moment I cleared the property line. Signal bars appearing, messages flooding in. The CB crackled with normal traffic, drivers sharing road conditions and weather updates. Everything was back to normal, functioning the way it should. But I remembered what Claire had said about the zone surrounding her property, about how leaving meant entering its territory again. And I knew that even though my electronics were working, even though I could hear other drivers on the radio, I wasn't clear yet. I was still in the zone's reach, still subject to whatever rules it operated under. Still fair game for whatever it wanted to try. The drive out of the valley felt longer than it should have, like the distance between Claire's motel and the main highway had stretched during the night, adding miles that hadn't existed before. The narrow road wound through trees heavy with fresh snow, branches forming a tunnel overhead that blocked what little morning light managed to penetrate the cloud cover. My headlights cut through the gray dimness, and I kept my speed moderate, watching for ice patches and fallen branches, anything that might force me to stop. The CB was alive with chatter now, normal traffic reports and weather updates, but I kept the volume low, not ready to trust it completely, not after everything I'd experienced. The junction with the main highway appeared suddenly, the trees opening up to reveal the wider road stretching north and south. I merged carefully, checking mirrors out of habit even though there was no other traffic visible, and pointed the truck north toward Billings. The load in my trailer was time-sensitive, medical supplies that needed to reach a distribution center by end of day, and I'd already burned more time than I'd planned stopping at the motel. But I didn't regret it. The few hours of rest, however uneasy, had given me a chance to process what was happening, to understand that the zone wasn't just a series of random malfunctions, but something organized, something with intention and purpose. The highway climbed steadily, following the valley floor before beginning its ascent toward the next pass. This was the stretch I'd been dreading, the final gauntlet before I'd be clear of zone territory. According to my calculations based on what Dorian and Claire had told me, I had about 30 miles of exposure left. 30 miles where anything could happen, where the zone could make one last attempt to draw me in. I checked my phone, saw I still had signal, and decided to call Dorian while I could, while the connection was still reliable. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting for the call. "Silas, you on the road?" "Yeah, just left Claire's place. Got maybe 30 miles before I'm clear. Wanted to check in while I still have signal." I paused, adjusted my grip on the wheel as the road curved. She told me about the deal she made with the zone, about giving it information in exchange for leaving her motel alone. "That's real? That actually works?" "As far as I can tell, yes," Dorian said, and I could hear the sound of papers rustling in the background, like he was going through files. "Claire's been doing it for years, keeping those records. documenting every encounter, and in all that time, no driver has reported seeing a fake lodgepole in. The zone honors the agreement, or at least appears to, which tells us something important about what we're dealing with. What does it tell us? I asked, genuinely curious now, despite my fear. That it understands concepts like reciprocity and boundaries, Dorian said slowly, like he was thinking through it as he spoke. That it's not just mimicking human behavior, but actually comprehending it on some level. A purely mechanical phenomenon wouldn't care about deals or agreements. But something intelligent, something that can process cause and effect and social contracts, that's different. That's something we might be able to communicate with, negotiate with, if we understood it better. I thought about that as I drove, watching the road ahead for signs of trouble. Has anyone tried, besides Claire, I mean, has anyone attempted to actually talk to it, establish communication? There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I thought maybe I'd lost the connection. Then Dorian spoke, his voice careful. A few people have tried, researchers, mostly, academics who heard the stories and wanted to investigate. They set up equipment in the zone, tried to monitor the transmissions, establish patterns. Most of them came away with nothing useful, just recordings of static and a few anomalous readings their instruments couldn't explain. But there was one guy, professor from a university in Utah, who claimed he'd made contact. Said he'd established a dialogue with whatever was generating the interference, that he'd spent hours transmitting questions and receiving responses. What happened to him? I asked, though something in Dorian's tone told me I wouldn't like the answer. He stopped responding to emails, stopped answering his phone. His colleagues went looking for him, found his research vehicle parked on the shoulder in the middle of the zone. Engine running, door open, all his equipment still set up and recording. But he was gone. They searched for weeks, brought in search and rescue teams, dogs, helicopters, everything. Never found a trace of him. It's like he just stepped out of his vehicle and walked into another dimension. The road ahead began to climb more steeply, and I downshifted, feeling the truck's engine strain against the grade. So, trying to communicate with it is a bad idea. Trying to do anything more than survive it is a bad idea, Dorian said firmly. Claire's situation is unique, and even she admits she got lucky. The zone accepted her offer, but it might not accept anyone else's. And the professor, he thought he understood what he was dealing with, thought he could apply scientific methodology to something that doesn't follow scientific rules. That's what got him killed, or taken, or whatever happened to him. We talked for a few more minutes, Dorian walking me through the route ahead, pointing out places where other drivers had reported particularly intense activity. There was a curve about 20 miles up where the road doubled back on itself in a tight switchback, and he warned me to be especially careful there. Something about the geometry of that turn, he said. Drivers report seeing things in their mirrors that aren't on the road behind them, shadows that move wrong, vehicles that appear and disappear. Just keep your eyes forward when you go through it. Don't look back. Don't try to figure out what you're seeing. I promised I would. Thanked him again for all his help, and we ended the call. The phone showed full signal still, all 5 bars, but I knew that could change in an instant. I set it on the dash where I could see it and focused on driving, on maintaining steady speed and staying alert for anything unusual. The snow had stopped falling, but the roads were slick with packed powder, and I could feel the truck wanting to slide on the corners, the trailer trying to push the tractor sideways. I kept my inputs smooth and gentle, no sudden movements, working with the vehicle instead of against it. The CB stayed quiet for the next 10 miles, just that low background hiss that indicated it was receiving, but nothing was transmitting. Then, without warning, It crackled to life. But this time, it wasn't a voice or music or any of the usual tricks. It was a conversation, two people talking back and forth like they were on a normal radio call. I recognized one of the voices immediately. It was mine. The other voice was unfamiliar, male, calm, and professional, and they were discussing route conditions, weather, normal trucker talk, the kind of mundane exchange that happened 1,000 times a day on CB channels all across the country. Except I wasn't talking. I wasn't transmitting. The voice was mine, my speech patterns, my inflection. But I wasn't the one speaking. I listened in growing horror as my voice discussed things I'd never said, shared information I'd never transmitted, carried on a conversation I'd never had. The other voice responded naturally, asking questions, offering advice, completely unaware that they were talking to something that only sounded human. The conversation continued for maybe 2 minutes, both voices clear and distinct, before cutting off abruptly, replaced by silence. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, called Dorian back. He answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "It's using my voice," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Right now, on the CB, having a conversation with another driver. But I'm not transmitting, Dorian. I'm not saying anything. It's doing it on its own." "Jesus," Dorian breathed. "Silas, that's advanced. That's way more sophisticated than what I've heard before. It's not just mimicking anymore, it's generating, creating new transmissions based on what it's learned from you. That means what?" I demanded when he trailed off. "That means it's figured you out," he said quietly. "It's processed enough data from your transmissions, your speech patterns, your voice, that it can create new content. It's basically built a model of you, Silas, a digital copy that it can use to interact with other drivers, to learn more, to spread further. The implications of that hit me like a physical blow. So even if I never go through the zone again, it can keep using my voice, keep pretending to be me?" "Potentially, yes," Dorian said. "But Silas, listen to me. This is important. You need to warn any drivers you hear it talking to. If you hear your own voice on the CB, you need to break in, interrupt the conversation. Tell them it's not real. Otherwise, they'll keep responding, keep teaching it, and it'll keep getting better at impersonating people." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that was impossible, that I couldn't just start interrupting random CB conversations claiming some kind of identity theft. But he was right. If the zone had created a copy of me, if it was using my voice to interact with other drivers, then those drivers had a right to know. I grabbed the CB mic, keyed it, and said, "This is Silas Vaught, and if you've been hearing transmissions from someone claiming to be me, that's not me. That's something else, something in the zone that's learned to mimic my voice. Do not respond to it, do not engage with it. Just keep driving and stay alert." Silence followed my transmission. No acknowledgement, no response, just empty air. Either no one was listening, or they thought I was crazy, or they were too far away to receive my signal. I tried again, broadcasting the same warning on multiple channels, but got no response on any of them. The zone owned the airwaves out here, I realized. It controlled what got through and what didn't, and it clearly didn't want my warning reaching anyone who might be talking to my digital copy. The road climbed higher, the trees thinning out as the elevation increased, and I could see the switchback curve ahead, the place Dorian had warned me about. It looked innocent enough from a distance, just a tight bend in the road where the highway doubled back on itself to maintain a manageable grade. But as I got closer, I could feel something change, a pressure building in the air, a thickness that made it hard to breathe. My mirrors started to distort, the images in them bending and warping like I was looking through bad glass. I kept my eyes forward like Dorian had instructed, refusing to look at what the mirrors were showing me, refusing to acknowledge whatever tricks the zone was playing. But I couldn't help catching glimpses. Shapes that moved wrong, shadows that didn't match any physical object, and once, just for a second, what looked like my own truck following me. Perfect mirror image, matching my speed exactly. I gritted my teeth, forced my eyes to stay locked on the road ahead, and navigated through the curve with hands that were white-knuckled on the wheel. The pressure increased as I went through it, like I was pushing against something solid, like the air itself was trying to stop me from continuing. But I kept my foot on the gas, kept the truck moving forward, and after what felt like an eternity, the curve straightened out and the pressure released. I checked the mirrors again, carefully this time. The road behind me was empty, normal, no phantom trucks, no impossible shadows. Just asphalt and snow and the curve receding into the distance. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it, saw a text message from Dorian. "You threw the switchback?" I texted back a quick yes, and his response came immediately. "Good. Another 15 miles and you should be clear. Stay focused." The CB crackled again, and this time when my voice came through, it was saying things I definitely hadn't said, couldn't have said, because they were about experiences I'd never had. It was talking about routes I'd never run, trucks I'd never driven, people I'd never met. But it sounded convinced, sounded authoritative, like it believed every word it was saying. The zone had gone beyond simple mimicry now. It was inventing, creating false memories and false experiences, building an entire fictional version of me that existed only in radio transmissions. And somewhere out there, other drivers were hearing it, learning from it, possibly even believing they were talking to the real Silas Vaught. I tried interrupting again, tried to set the record straight, but my transmissions were being blocked or absorbed or somehow prevented from reaching anyone. The fake version of me continued talking, and I was forced to listen to this digital copy, this ghost that wore my voice like a mask, interacting with the world in ways I couldn't control or stop. It was violating in a way I hadn't anticipated, this sense that something had stolen part of my identity and was using it for purposes I couldn't understand. The highway crested a ridge and began its descent toward the northern plains, and I could see for miles now, see the landscape opening up, see the mountains falling away behind me. My phone signal strengthened, went from 3 bars to 4 to 5. The CB chatter became more normal, real voices discussing real things, the fake version of me fading into the background and finally disappearing completely. I was clearing the zone, escaping its influence, driving back into normal territory where the rules made sense and electronics worked the way they were supposed to. But I didn't feel relief. I felt marked, violated, like something had been taken from me that I couldn't get back. The zone had my voice now, had studied me closely enough to recreate not just how I sounded, but how I thought, how I spoke, how I interacted with other drivers. And it would keep using that information, keep generating transmissions in my name, potentially forever. I'd become part of the zone's arsenal, one more tool it could use to lure drivers in, to study them, to learn from them. I called Dorian as soon as I was certain I had stable signal. He answered immediately. "You're clear?" "Yeah," I said, though my voice was hollow. "Yeah, I'm clear. But Dorian, what do I do about this? About it using my voice? How do I stop it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if you can stop it," he said finally. "Once the zone has enough data on someone, it can generate indefinitely. The best we can do is spread the word, warn other drivers to be suspicious of transmissions that seem off, that don't quite match the person they think they're talking to, and you can keep calling in, keep making it known that there's a fake version of you out there, so people learn to distinguish between the real Silas and the copy. "That's it?" I asked, frustration bleeding into my voice. "That's all I can do? Just keep warning people and hope they believe me?" "I'm sorry, Silas," Dorian said, and he sounded genuinely pained. "I know it's not enough, but we're dealing with something we don't fully understand, something that operates according to rules we haven't figured out yet. The fact that you made it through 3 times now, that you resisted it each time, that's significant. Most drivers don't make it through once without stopping, without engaging. You're stronger than you know." We talked for a while longer, him reassuring me trying to process what had happened and what it meant for my future. Eventually, we ended the call, and I continued north, putting more miles between myself and the zone, trying to convince myself that I was safe now, that it was over. But I knew it wasn't over, would never be over. Because the zone had marked me, had studied me, had taken something from me that I couldn't reclaim. And every time another driver heard my voice coming through their CB, every time someone responded to the fake version of me, the zone would learn a little more, get a little stronger, get a little better at pretending to be human. I delivered the load and billings on time, signed the paperwork, and immediately requested a different route for my next run. Dispatch was accommodating, probably sensed something was wrong, even though I didn't explain it fully. They assigned me to a southern corridor, runs through Colorado and New Mexico, where the terrain was different, where the zone's influence didn't reach. I took the job gratefully and headed south, leaving Wyoming behind, leaving the mountains and their secrets to prey on other drivers, other voices. But I couldn't leave it behind completely, because every time I turned on my CB, every time I heard another driver's voice coming through, I wondered, was it real? Was it actually them? Or was it the zone, using some copy it had made, some digital ghost wearing their identity like a disguise? The paranoia was subtle at first, easy to dismiss, but it grew over time. I started avoiding the CB except when absolutely necessary, started relying more on my phone and GPS, started trusting electronics less and my own instincts more. Dorian called regularly, checking in, sharing reports from other drivers who'd been through the zone. The pattern was consistent. People who engaged with it lost time, lost memories, came back different. People who resisted it got marked, got copied, got turned into tools the zone could use. There was no winning, just degrees of losing, and all you could do was minimize the damage and keep driving. He told me stories about other drivers whose voices had been stolen, who reported hearing themselves on the CB saying things they'd never said, going places they'd never been. It was an epidemic, he said, spreading slowly but steadily, the zone learning from each encounter and using that knowledge to improve its mimicry. I ran southern routes for 3 months before I finally had to take another load through Wyoming. Different route this time, further east, nowhere near the Bighorns or the zone, as Dorian and I understood it. But I was nervous anyway. Couldn't shake the feeling that the boundaries we'd mapped were incomplete, that the zone reached further than we thought, that anywhere in these mountains could become dangerous if conditions were right. I kept my CB off for the entire run, relied on my phone for navigation and communication, didn't give the zone any opportunity to reach out, to make contact, to try luring me in again. And it worked. I made it through without incident, delivered my load, got back to safer territory. But the fear never left. That constant awareness that I was driving through a world where some roads led to places that shouldn't exist, where voices on the radio might not belong to the people they sounded like, where stopping at the wrong exit could mean losing hours or days or yourself entirely. I'd become hyper-vigilant, paranoid, jumping at every unusual transmission, questioning every encounter. Claire called me once, few months after my stay at her motel. She'd heard from Dorian that I was avoiding the zone, that I'd been marked by it. She wanted to add my story to her records, wanted details about the voice copying, about how sophisticated the mimicry had become. I spent an hour on the phone with her describing everything I'd experienced, and she took notes, asking clarifying questions, building her database of the zone's capabilities. At the end of the conversation, she said something that stuck with me. "You know what scares me most about this, Silas? It's not that the zone exists, or that it's intelligent, or even that it's learning from us. It's that we don't know what it wants with all this information it's gathering. What's the end goal? What's it building toward? Because something that studies this intensely, that works this hard to understand human communication and behavior, it's preparing for something, and I don't think any of us are going to like what that something is." I thought about that often in the months that followed. Thought about the professor who disappeared trying to communicate with it. About Dorian losing 6 hours and never recovering the memory. About all the drivers whose voices had been stolen and were now being used to lure other drivers in. What was the zone building? What was it preparing for? And would we recognize the danger when it finally revealed its purpose? I kept driving because that's what truckers do. We drive. We haul loads from one place to another. We navigate through weather and traffic and mechanical problems, and we survive. But I drove differently now, more carefully, more suspicious of everything I saw and heard. I avoided certain routes entirely, memorized the locations where strange things had been reported, kept detailed logs of any unusual transmissions or encounters. I became part of the network that Dorian and Claire had built, a community of drivers who'd seen too much, who knew too much, who carried the burden of knowledge that most people would dismiss as paranoia or delusion. And sometimes, late at night when I was parked at a rest area and the world outside was dark and quiet, I'd turn on my CB just to listen. I'd scan through the channels, hearing the normal chatter of other drivers, the routine traffic reports and casual conversations. And occasionally, maybe once every few weeks, I'd hear it. My voice. Not coming from me, not under my control, but out there in the ether, talking to someone, sharing information, sounding so perfectly like me that even I had trouble distinguishing it from my own speech. And I'd listen to this digital ghost, this copy the zone had made, and I'd wonder how many other drivers were out there, how many other voices had been stolen, how many digital copies were floating through the airwaves pretending to be human. The zone is still there, in those mountains, waiting for the next driver to pass through its territory. It's learning, evolving, getting better at what it does. And someday, maybe soon, it'll be good enough that no one will be able to tell the difference between the real voices and the copies. When that day comes, when the zone's mimicry becomes perfect and indistinguishable from reality, what happens? Do we stop trusting our radios entirely? Do we abandon the very communication systems that keep us safe on these lonely highways? Or do we accept that some of the voices we hear aren't human and learn to live with that? Learn to navigate through a world where identity itself has become unstable? I don't have answers to those questions. All I have are miles, thousands and thousands of miles of road stretching out ahead of me, and the knowledge that some of those miles will take me through territory where the rules change, where electronics fail, where voices lie. And I keep driving because that's what I do, that's who I am. But I drive differently now. I drive like someone who knows the road is watching, listening, learning. Someone who understands that every transmission is a gift of data to something that wants to understand us, that's working to replicate us, that might someday succeed in becoming us. And late at night, when I'm alone in my cab and the highway stretches empty in both directions, I sometimes catch myself wondering, when I speak, when I key the mic and transmit, is it really me? Or Has the zone gotten so good at copying me that even I can't tell anymore? Has it replaced me without me noticing, substituted its version for mine so smoothly that the transition was invisible? Am I still Silas Vaught, or am I just a copy that thinks it's Silas Vaught, driving through the dark and not knowing the difference? I try not to think about it too much. Try to focus on the practical matters of driving, of making deliveries, of maintaining my equipment and managing my logs. But the question lingers, always there in the back of my mind, unresolved and maybe unresolvable. Because if the zone can copy voices perfectly, if it can replicate speech patterns and memories and behaviors, then where's the line between original and copy? When does mimicry become so perfect that it stops being mimicry and becomes reality? Dorian says I'm overthinking it, that I'm still me, still the person who resisted the zone's attempts to lure me in. But sometimes, when we talk on the phone, I wonder if I'm really talking to him or if I'm talking to his copy, the version the zone made when it studied him for 6 hours that day 5 years ago. And I wonder if he has the same doubts about me, if he questions whether the person calling him is still Silas, or just something that sounds like Silas, something that learned to be me so well that even my friends can't tell the difference. These are the thoughts that keep me company on the long hauls, the philosophical questions that have no satisfying answers. And maybe that's the zone's real purpose, I think sometimes, not to replace us, not to harm us, but to make us question what we are, to introduce doubt into the very concept of identity. Because once you've heard your own voice speaking words you never said, once you've encountered a perfect copy of yourself operating independently in the world, you can never be quite certain again. The foundation of self becomes unstable, and you're left driving through the dark wondering if the person behind the wheel is who you think they are. But I keep driving, keep making my deliveries, keep checking in with Dorian and Claire, keep warning other drivers about the zone and its capabilities. Because even if I can't answer the big questions, even if I don't know for certain who or what I am anymore, I can still do the job, can still move freight from point A to point B, can still navigate the highways and byways of this vast country. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the act of driving itself, the simple physical reality of hands on wheel and road beneath tires, is proof enough of existence, of identity, of being real. The zone is out there, waiting, learning, growing stronger with every driver who passes through, every voice it studies, every transmission it records and analyzes and replicates. And someday, maybe soon, it'll achieve whatever goal it's been working toward, whatever purpose drove it to study us so intensely. When that day comes, I hope I'm far away, running routes through safer territory where the radios work normally and the voices are real. But I suspect that day will find me anyway, will find all of us, because the zone isn't limited to those mountains anymore. It's spreading, slowly but surely, carried by the voices it's copied, and the drivers who unknowingly transmit its replications further into the world. We're teaching it to be us. And when it finally learns that lesson perfectly, when the student becomes indistinguishable from the teacher, what then? Do we welcome it as one of us? Do we fight it, try to reclaim the airwaves and the highways from this intelligence that we helped create through our own transmissions? Or do we just accept it? Adapt to a world where human and copy coexist, where identity is fluid and uncertain, and the line between real and artificial has been erased? I don't know. All I know is that I'm still driving, still making my runs, still checking my mirrors and watching for signs of trouble. The CB is on but muted, receiving but not transmitting, and my phone shows full signal, 5 bars, connection stable. The road ahead is clear and straight. Visibility perfect. Conditions as good as they get. Everything is normal. Everything is fine. But somewhere out there, In those mountains I left behind, my voice is still talking, still transmitting, still learning to be more me than I am. And every time another driver hears it and responds, every time someone believes they're talking to Silas Vaught when they're really talking to something else, the zone gets stronger, gets smarter, gets closer to whatever it's becoming. And I keep driving because that's all I can do. Keep moving forward. Keep putting miles behind me. Keep trusting that forward momentum is enough to stay ahead of whatever's following. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between transmissions, I wonder if I'm really moving forward at all, or if I'm just driving in circles, trapped in a loop I don't recognize, following a route that leads nowhere while my copy does the real driving, makes the real deliveries, lives the real life. The zone taught me one thing for certain. Reality is more fragile than we think. And once you've seen it bend, once you've watched it break and reconstitute itself into something that looks right but feels wrong, you can never trust it completely again. You just drive and watch and wonder and hope that when you finally reach your destination, you'll still recognize the person who climbs out of the cab and signs for the delivery. That's the real terror of the zone. Not that it might trap you, not that it might steal your voice or your time or your memory, but that it might replace you so perfectly that even you don't notice. That it might create a copy so accurate that the original becomes unnecessary, redundant, a rough draft that can be discarded now that the final version exists. I'm still driving, still out here on these highways, still making my runs. But every day I wonder, am I the original? Or am I the copy that thinks it's the original? And if I'm the copy, where's the real Silas Vaught? Is he still out there somewhere, driving different routes, living a different life? Or did the zone consume him entirely, leaving only me, this perfect replica, this ghost that doesn't know it's dead? The road stretches out ahead, endless and empty, and I follow it because that's what I do, what I am, what I was programmed or taught or created to do. Keep driving, keep transmitting, keep being Silas Vaught, even if I'm not sure anymore what that means, or whether it was ever really me at all.